checking. Our Watertown City Council meeting for January 3rd, 2023. Please rise. First, we're going to go to Councilman Tupper for a notice, and then we are going to get our prayer from Hank Rosso, the chaplain of the Watertown Fire, Rescue, and Midwest Bible Camp.
Thank you. I would like to ask for a moment of silence for one of our old council members, Tuffy Giselbeck, who sat on the council, I believe, in the 90s, who passed away last week. Tuffy was an inspiration of mine for years, and I'd like to just show him this moment of respect. Thank you. Thank you.
Our Heavenly Father, as we come to you this evening, we first want to say thank you. Thank you for this great community. Thank you for these leaders that we stand before right now. We thank you for their unity of heart and their common bond of care for our citizens. And God, we also say thank you for our first responders, the police and fire, the Cottington County Sheriff's Department, and those that keep us safe and watch over us. And God, thank you also for the many city services we enjoy. Even today, as the garbage guy was going through the Bible camp, I was so thankful that we have such a great service like that. We ask your hand in this meeting tonight, give wisdom, and we thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay. Bueller. Here. Danforth.
Here.
Holdeen.
Here.
Paulson. Here. Shuddy.
Here.
Tupper.
Here.
Billhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Shuddy. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Now is the time for public comments. If anyone is here who would like to address the council upon something that is not on tonight's agenda, now is your time to do so. Councilman Billhauer?
Thank you, Mayor. I just like to, as long as we're recognizing people that we may have been in contact with, we lost a dear friend of this community to the council this last week, Don Eggert. Anybody that knows anything about radio, Don was a dear friend of the community and would cover these council meetings, and we lost him, 89 years old. I got to tell a real brief story. I don't think he'd mind me sharing this. Probably 6-7 years ago, Don was here covering the meeting, and it got to be late that night. We actually went into executive session, and Don was going to leave via the elevator, and he got stuck in the elevator. And it wasn't until the executive session was over that he was able to work himself out of the elevator. We did not know he was in there, but dear sweet soul that we lost this last week.
So for any radio personalities out there, it could be worse. Any other public comments? Hearing none, close public comments. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda with two changes. Item A is not going to be a presentation and acceptance on the audit, but instead we are going to have a presentation from Representative from District 5, Hugh Bartles, presumptive Speaker of the House of the South Dakota House of Representatives. And that is going to be item A, but we are also going to then move item A after item E, after the public hearings. And that's just so that we can get the public hearings out of the way, and then we can have, if we need a discussion with Representative Bartles. But he's here to talk specifically about a few things that will impact Watertown in the upcoming session. Councilman Paulson? Oh, and then that's what that topic will be, just to explain it to the council why I'm asking for a little leeway. And we can't reschedule him because he will be out in session for the next several months. And at that point, the information that he will share with us tonight is no longer usable for us.
Make that motion.
Okay.
Nope.
Councilman Paulson, did you have anything to
I just have to
add?
recuse myself on letter J.
Letter J. Okay. Thank you, Councilman Paulson. All right. Is Councilman Tupper will move the approval of the agenda, seconded by Councilman Vilhauer. Any comments on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We'll move on to item B, which is a second reading of ordinance 22-28, amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown for a portion of Eastwoods Edition from R2 Single Family Attached Residential District to R3 Multifamily Residential District. We'll go to our Public Works Manager, Heath Von Eye, for more information.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is the second reading as noted in the title of the action item here tonight. The petitioners have applied to rezone a portion of the land that they own on the north side of town, which is part of what's known as the Eastwoods Edition. And that rezone would be from an R2 zoning district to an R3 zoning district. As the council's all aware, that allows for the developer to construct higher density residential units on that property than what the R2 would allow for. This has gone through the conventional rezone process and through the Planning Commission. We've also had a first reading here at the last council meeting. I'd note that the Planning Commission did not recommend approval of this to the City Council on a split vote of 3 in favor and 4 opposed. And would also note from some of the notes in the case notes here on the agenda item that the adjoining zoning district to the east is R3. Immediately surrounding the west and south of this parcel is ag land. It's city-owned property that functions as a drainage area. And further to the south, you transition right into an R1 zoning district. With that, I'll stand by for any questions. I'll pull up a map here for reference as well on Teams.
Thank you very much. Want to explain something to the council and for everyone out in the audience that because this came to the City Council without recommendation from the Plan Commission, it requires a 2/3 vote in the affirmative to adopt the residential or the rezoning, which would mean that 5 councilmen have to vote aye tonight on this in order for this to pass. With that, we'll go to a public hearing. Are there any proponents to this item? Please come forward, make sure the microphone is on, introduce yourself and who you're representing.
Hello, my name is Kellen Bludorn. Sorry, I lost my voice. And my partner here,
Dustin Kopman.
we're with Archer Land Company. And we've had this here before. I know like you heard at the planning and zoning that got shot down. And we have redrawn the plans a little bit. I don't know, Brandy was maybe going to have them available to pull up on the screen where we could just share a little bit of our vision of what we're planning there.
Let's make sure that we've got that capability. For anyone in the audience, especially those on that side, if you want to get up, I'll allow some leeway to come over and if you want to see the screen.
And we could visit about it too as well before we get it up, I guess.
Why
It's
don't
up
you
to
just
guys.
start?
Okay.
Yep.
So originally we proposed, there's 3.6 acres here, and as they've said, there's a buffer of the ag land around there to the south. We proposed 5 12-plex buildings originally. We've changed the plans to be 4 12-plex buildings. We've shifted all the buildings to the north, get them farther away from the neighbors to the south, putting them buildings at about 400 feet approximately away from the closest neighbor to the south. And then we did a little buffer zone. We did 3 twin homes in there to the south, which would meet the R2 requirement. So the north side of the property would be the multifamily. I'm hoping we're able to pull it up. I did share it with a few councilmen, so they had copies of that. So currently it would be a nice little infill community built in there with a nice park, 3 twin homes and 4 12-plex buildings. The 3 twin homes, they'd be a zero-entry construction, so it'd be nice for elderly or even for an ADA type of unit there. 100% of the parking is off-street parking. These will be professionally engineered with proper drainage in place with this from the civil engineer as well. And with that, this will have to have some retention ponds drawn in order to have this type of development put in there. So this could be a benefit there for the neighborhood if there's any water issues around there. We do plan to develop this and hold it as a long-term investment property with professional management in place. Oh, we did get some of them up here. So you can see right now we've shifted them buildings to the north. We have the little park behind there. The twin homes have the attached garages. The apartments do not. We have the adequate parking space. I believe when we first came here, when we were working with the city on developing or designing this, we were told with max density it was somewhere between 70 and 80 units could fit on this parcel with the proper. And right now we have 54, so we are quite a bit less than what we could put on here. And we want to say this. I know we can't hold anybody to it if you rezoned it to an R3, but I just want to say this. I guess we want to build something that works for the neighborhood. We'd like to work with the neighbors to try to get something developed there. And if our word isn't worth anything, I don't know what we're doing here anyways, but I would hope that we could have some level of trust that what we propose would be built. And with that said, we've talked to the owner of the land and his real estate agent about putting covenants in place that could maybe protect the neighbors before closing. We're planning to close in the next 30 to 45 days on this land, and we could have covenants drafted that would keep the buildings, the height restrictions down to a 2-story building, maybe even restrict the total number of units, things of that nature. But as you can see, we drew it up as an upscale neighborhood. We own this same building in town right now over by the pool. We developed 2 buildings of the exact same construction right behind the Peddler's Market. And they've been just a really good, still fairly affordable for what you get, a lot of square footage. They consist of 8 2-bedrooms, 2 1-bedrooms, and 2 studio apartments in the apartments there. So it'd be a total of I think it was 84 bedrooms in the total community. That being said, one thing we could, with the current zoning as R2, we could split this into about 10 different lots with a max of maybe 15 lots to do duplexes in here. And with that being said, we could do 3 to 4 bedroom units and have quite a bit more bedrooms here, even with the current zoning today. But I just don't think it would be a cohesive design for the neighborhood. I think this fits in much better for the community. Of course, I'm a proponent for this, but I just want to explain that if we get 10 duplexes out there and end up with 20 units and 4 bedrooms in each unit and have 80 bedrooms on there in duplexes, it just feels like it would be crammed and it just wouldn't, I don't know. I just feel like it wouldn't look that good myself. But you can see the community here. We had some 3D renderings drawn. We've put in the time and the sweat as far as the designs go and the engineering. We'd love to have a buffer there if we need fences, if people, if we want to have fences along the south, or we put trees in right now just because we really think that architecturally and the aesthetics of it look good there. But we're not asking for any subsidies or anything from the city on this. I mean, it'd be a private development. We'd pay for it with our own money and try to keep it upscale, as well as the management. The Mills Property Management would manage this project, and they have lots of criterias in order to move into their places and all their fair housing and their safe neighborhood stuff. It's as well as sidewalks. If there's sidewalks needed along the highway there, we want to work with whatever it takes to connect this in there to make it fit the neighborhood. I know there's walking paths to the west. If we need trails or a sidewalk along that north side, we can do that as well. We did the driveways on the side, so it's almost like a private drive coming down to them twin homes there. And you can see some detention is drawn in. Now, that's just for illustration only. We'd have to have the civil plans come in here to tell us exactly where them detention ponds go as well. What is best for Watertown? We thought through this. We try to look at both sides of this. I understand the neighbors. It's always hard when it's in your backyard. I get it. I'm in the real estate business in Brookings. We deal with this often down there as well, and it's always we always try to look at it from both sides, and we understand where the neighbors come from, and totally get that. We do have some elderly twin homes here, which would be a benefit. Of course, there's the housing needs of Watertown. There's a shortage of quality rental units. This would help clean up the land there, and with this undeveloped piece of land, get this all developed. With all the local growth with LATI and different businesses, we feel that there's much need there. Of course, it helped the tax base, and it is fairly hard to find R3 land to build on for this type of neighborhood. And I do think who will live in these units, it could be college kids, it could be young professionals, it could be the neighbors' kids that move in here, it could be the future buyer of their home that moves in here. They move in here, love the neighborhood, they want to live over in that part of town. So we don't know all them things. That's all. Yeah, it's all what the future will tell, I guess. Currently, like I talked about the duplex, we could have a max of about 180 to 120 bedrooms there if we maxed out the land with the current R2 zoning. Ours is 84 total bedrooms with the twin homes. So, was there anything else, Dustin? I know we had pulled some comparables down the road. I know that there's a number of units just within this, just a few blocks, that have apartments right next to R1 land. And given that ag buffer around there and putting the twin homes on the south side, it almost serves as an R2 buffer between the R1 there. And we found 3 different properties within just a few blocks of there that are R3 right next to R1 land. And we do have maps if anyone wants to see them. There's some 20 units and a couple little 8-plexes with garages. And we did some math on how dense they are, how many square feet of land per unit. And ours fits right in there, maybe a little bit on the low side. We're at about 2,900 square feet per unit on our proposed land, and some of these were in the 3,000 up to or down to 1,800 square feet of land per unit. So we don't propose to maximize the units here, but in order to make something like this pencil and to make it feasible, it's going to be pretty hard to make it work with twin homes. And so we just feel, as obviously as far as the financial side, which nobody cares about but us, we have to kind of find a balancing number that will make this thing pencil to make it go in order to develop it with the land cost, the infrastructure cost, the drainage, the sewer, water, all that. So, is there any questions from the
questions will come later, but thank
Okay.
you very much, Mr. Bluedorn and Mr. Kopman. Want to thank you. I also want to say thank you for driving up today. I apologize last time, the technological issues that prevented you from speaking to the council last time. That also gives me the technological issues gives me a good segue to announce that Councilman Danforth is attending online. He wanted me to make sure that his attendance and his participation was acknowledged. I also want to make it clear to council that our city attorney, Lisa Carrico, is here to answer any questions regarding this issue and what possibly could come of it. She has researched it all day today to be well versed in this. So direct questions of procedure, not only to myself, but to our city attorney, Lisa Carrico. Thank you very much, Mr. Kopman.
One small thing I just wanted to clarify on the vote. So there's 6 members. Would it be 4 members voting yes, or you're a part of the vote?
It would be
so.
5. It would be 5 members voting yes, and the mayor is a vote on every.
Okay, so
on
you're
every
you're
issue.
in the vote. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Any other proponents?
Good evening, council. Kyle Lallam, I'm here on behalf of the seller of this, the current owner of this property. I'm a realtor with Haugen Nelson Realty. Just to kind of echo a little bit of what Kellen and his partner talked about. I mean, they really did steal all my thunder, so I don't have a lot to add. Other than the fact that on the map that you see before you here, you do have R3. There's 2 R3 parcels directly to the east of that. If you look at where the R2 zoning is on that map right there, where that blue line outlining the R2 is, there's already a sidewalk that's there. That was where Cherry Drive was originally supposed to come out and connect with 14th Avenue until the development of Midwest Business Condos came in and bought that land that you're showing on 27th Street and that R3 and R2 as buffer zones there in 2012 and then developed that. So a lot of the northern portion of Cherry Drive didn't actually get constructed until 2009 and then all the way through 2012 and 13. The R3 properties that are up there, there's 3 buildings directly contiguous with this proposed R3 rezone. They are they're each a 6-plex. There's 18 units in there, or there's 3, or each unit has 4 3-bedrooms and 2 2-bedrooms in that, and that's that first initial set of R3, and then Whispering Winds, also R3. Both of those pieces of ground were purchased at the time that Midwest Business Condos decided to do the extension of 27th Street or add 27th Street and bring that development in 2012. Both of those buildings, Whispering Winds and the first building that was previously owned by Snyder's Group, were built in 2014 and 2015. Just to kind of put some perspective in there. And then those R2 zoning that's buffered around that, like Mr. Bluedorn said, is a buffer zone. That road, that Cherry Drive east and west running right there is 60 feet. And if you run the GIS and run from the south side of the R2 to the nearest adjoining property owner there, that's roughly, based off the GIS that I did this afternoon, is about 93 feet, or no, excuse me, 113 feet from the south side of this proposed unit to the back side of the land. And then the east-west run that's up there on the very west side of this property is approximately 90 feet. With the bike path in there as well. So there's a little bit of history that brings that in there. Like Mr. Bluedorn did say, there's currently 10 lots that are allowable in there. And then you could put 10 or 20, actually 4-bedroom, 2-story units in there and get your compaction up to 80. So I have spoken with both the potential buyer and the seller. The sellers are willing. We talked about doing a possible developers agreement. That is my understanding that won't work. But they would be willing to do and sign off on a covenant restriction allowing no more than a 2-story building or what the prospective buyers have proposed, and we would do that prior to closing. And that way that should alleviate some of the issue with the possibility of what could be built future down the road, because those covenant restrictions do run in perpetuity with the land. So we could do that. We would file that in advance of the closing and make that part of an addendum agreement between the purchaser and the seller. And then that would get filed before the deed transfers from the current owner to the new owners. And that way it would be a protection for the neighborhood clauses or for the neighbors' concerns. We could do covenant restrictions as far as like siding and shingles and things like that, which I've talked to both buyer and seller about, and they are more than happy to do that if it allows them to move forward with this project. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for your time today for those of you that I did get a chance to talk to, and we look forward to your wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lallam. Any other proponents on this? Any other proponents? I'll close proponent testimony. Ask for opponent testimony. I would add that Chair will give some leeway. You can talk to what you have heard in the proponent testimony as well.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for giving us the opportunity to speak again here tonight. My name is Mike Odland, 1279 Cherry Drive Northeast, which would be, I guess, kind of right in the bullseye of this rezone. First of all, I would like to say that the new plan that was unveiled here tonight, I found out about that about 2 hours ago from Councilman Mike Danforth, who forwarded me an email. So I kind of feel like we're being blindsided a little bit here. This is all new to me. My first question to Mike when I saw the renderings was, would this be allowed within an R2 zoning? Does it conform to R2? And his response was no, 412 plexes would not be allowed in R2. And our argument, I mean, we talked, this has been exhausting for the neighborhood. This has been 8 years running, trying to get this developed as R2. The council back in 2015 zoned this R2. Mr. Tupper made the motion when I looked back at the minutes, and it was zoned R2 because it was the right fit then, and it's the right fit now. Nothing has changed. All of the R1 homes that you see there were there in 2015, and we built those homes or bought those homes without any expectation that we'd have R3 high-density housing in our neighborhood. And you know, we can talk about a lot of things, water retention, we can talk about setbacks, we can talk about collector streets, all of that stuff. When rubber meets the road with our neighborhood, it is about density. Density in relationship to R1, or R1. Now, it's currently zoned R2, and off the city website it says the objectives of R2 single-family attached residential, the number one thing listed is to reserve appropriately located areas for single-family living at reasonable population densities. So what is a reasonable population density? 4 12-plexes right next to R1. I want to go back to a couple of things from the first reading 2 weeks ago that a couple of the council members said. I want to revisit those because they really resonated with me, and I think the people in our neighborhood too. Councilman Danforth, and he's been great through this in answering my questions. He's my councilman up in Ward A. Mike Danforth at that meeting said, when we start getting into R3 in an area that is reasonably developed or established, it is almost always problematic, and it should be, to go to an R3. The conditions of what can be built change significantly when you get to R3. Then Mike said, we need to be respectful to the efforts that were made, the designations that were made, the commitments that were made by people that have properties that are adjacent or in close proximity to this. We have an obligation as a city to help protect that. That's a quote from Mike, because I rewatched the whole doggone meeting. I went back and I watched the Planning Commission meeting just to get my talking points in order here. Mr. Bueller at the last meeting mentioned that he spent 20-some years on the Planning Commission. He called this a no-brainer. That was a quote from Councilman Bueller, who I respect his opinion. He went on to say that all the years I spent on the Planning Commission, when you have the public outcry like this, we've got to look at what folks are thinking, what they want and what they don't want, and it's very simple. They bought in an area that was platted a certain way. This has been brought up twice, denied twice by the Planning Commission, 0 for 2, and here we are back at it again. Councilman Bueller said development's a good thing, but we have to look at this and say, is this the appropriate location for it? And as you drive around Watertown, I've said before, we're not anti-development in any way, shape, or form, but we want to see it developed as R2. That was our expectation, and it's been that for 8 years. So I don't hold any animosity toward the folks that want to do this development. We're pro-development up in our neighborhood. We want to see this final piece of the puzzle completed. I do feel blindsided seeing the new plan 2 hours ago when I got an email from Councilman Danforth, and we really didn't have a lot of time to react to this. I guess their plan is showing some willingness to negotiate. We as a neighborhood are too, as long as you can get it to conform with R2 or something very, very close to that, because that is what fits. It's about fit. You don't try and shove a square peg into a round hole. This is about fit, and I hope you make the right decision tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Adland. I want to verify that I asked before the council meeting the group of people, and there are a lot of people in the audience tonight. I'd say 50, anyway, I can do the count later, but the council chamber is packed, and I did ask, and everyone is here about this issue, and they are all against it. And I just want to verify that. I just asked not to have like everyone stand up or show hands, just as a matter of decorum, but I wanted to acknowledge the people here. With that said, is there anyone else who would like to testify against this item? And I'll just ask anyone who is going to testify, if you are going to mirror the comments that have already made in opposition, just say ditto. But if you have something original to add, that is permissible.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor. My name is Troy Van Duzen, City Manager Mack, members of the council. I reside at 1218 Cherry Drive along with my wife. We purchased our home in 2010, and at that time there was very little development north of us. We bought our home believing that we were going to see maybe some twin homes up there, maybe some nice newer homes going in. And since that time, we've seen twin homes, we've seen fourplexes, and now we have this possibly going up in our backyard as well. That's a concern of ours. We have seen an influx in traffic up in that area, and I think all the residents here can tell you we've seen a lot of traffic. And although we're very pro-development, we would like to see this project brought to Watertown. We don't necessarily want it up there in that location. Concern of mine is the density issue. The volume of traffic that is going to bring to our neighborhood is a concern of mine. In the summertime, there's a lot of pedestrians, there's a lot of vehicle traffic, and we see that. Yeah, traffic is going to have one of two ways out of there, correct? So you either go west on 14th Avenue or you go east on 14th Avenue. And if they're trying to get back to town, the only way to get back into town if you go east is to take Cherry Drive. And so a lot of those cars are coming directly past all of our homes right there in the R1 district. And so that's a concern of ours. So went before the Planning Commission. They recommended not pass this. I do support my neighbors. I support the neighborhood up there. We do not want to see this project in our neighborhood up there in the Eastwoods Edition, and I would appreciate your time and consideration on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further opponents?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. I live at 1225 Cherry Drive with my husband, Dean. This has been our family home for nearly 14 years. I'm employed as a realtor with Platinum Realty in Watertown, and I've been a realtor for about 16 years. So I do have a keen sense of what people are looking for when they're moving into a neighborhood. As a realtor, it is my opinion that if this high-density development is allowed, it will affect the single-family homes in our neighborhood. However, to be objective in this matter, I did reach out to 11 different realtors from 7 different offices and the NESD Association of Realtors. And I asked their opinion on this rezoning and if they feel it would affect the value of the single-family homes in the neighborhood. I had a unanimous response that all of them feel that this high-density development, if allowed, would affect the value of the single-family homes in our neighborhood. Comments were made that they feel that the appreciation could be reduced due to multifamily housing unit added into an already existing R1 area. In all my years of selling real estate, I've never once had a client say to me, I would like to buy this home because I could have high-density housing in my backyard. I, along with all of the other realtors that I have spoke with today, concur that the value of our single-family homes would be adversely affected by this rezoning. Additionally, if this rezone is approved, what kind of precedent does this set? Should every homeowner in the city of Watertown living in an R1 zone in a nicely maintained single-family home be concerned that R3 high-density housing will suddenly appear in their neighborhood? Lastly, I pose this question. Is going from R1 single-family homes in this neighborhood to R3 high-density apartments directly behind them with a strip of land as a buffer an example of proper transitional development? Is this a project that all of you would want in your backyard? Please vote no on this request. In doing so, I will show respect to the R1 homeowners who've lived in this neighborhood for many years and who've invested in their properties and their neighborhoods and in our community. As a neighborhood, we want to again stress that we do look forward to the completion of this final piece of this development with single-family homes or with twin homes. We thank you for your time and your consideration in this very important matter.
Thank you. Any further opponents?
Good evening. Jim Wallen. I live at 1348 22nd Street Northeast, which on the property line to the south of the property in question, if you take that line, that south property line, just take it straight, west there, and it cuts right into the center of our property. What you see here in this so-called ag land is our backyards. And I've heard this from all this, ditto on that, but it is. It's just our backyards. Most of us mow well beyond our actual property line into that greenway to keep it nice. The city, the street department takes care of that spot up there that's called ag land, and that's not mowed the same as it is in what's called parkland to the south of it. It doesn't make sense to have the city street department mow part of it and the parks mow the other part, but that's not the issue here today. It is our backyard, and there's just no getting around that. When I look out my back window, I see my neighbors in their backyard. I don't need to see anything else in that area but another backyard and another nice single-family owner-occupied dwelling. That's what we appreciate about that area. We built in 2004. There was nothing developed behind us at the time. We knew there'd be something. We knew there'd be a lot of homes in there. No problem with that. We were told at that time that probably be a church building in that what's now marked R2 was at that time proposed to be commercial. We asked, what's that going to give us up there? Well, probably a church is going to build in there. I don't know where that came from, but it was a good sales pitch by the realtor at the time. Then after that, we get, as was mentioned earlier, we had to fight to get this previous R3 request down to an R2. We thought we could all go along with that. We all expected there to be twin homes at best, maybe fourplexes, which I think also work in an R2. We could probably live with that. We agreed at that time to compromise and let it go to R2 rather than R3. I hear the developer here tonight talk about the possibility that he can use R2 here and do what he wants to do there by building twin homes. That's perfect. I think that's what they should do. I don't see any point in changing the zoning designation here to allow that to go to R3. R3 would allow the biggest possible building. There's no guarantees because they're not building yet that whatever they decided here today or propose here today is going to be what will end up constructed there if it turns into R3. They haven't even purchased the property yet. That can change. And when it's zoned R3, we have no control over that change. We could end up living with one of these big monstrosity home, 100, 200 unit apartment buildings there. That's what we're most fearful of. I've explained that we've had, not guarantees, but we've had things proposed to us that this is what it's going to be. And every one of them so far has been deleted from all consideration. Now they want to do this again. I implore these developers to withdraw their R3 request and to say, okay, we'll do some R2. They've said that they can. They've said that they've already planned around it. I think that's the thing to do. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallen. Any further opposition? Any further opposition? Chair will close the public hearing. Open it up for a council action just for everyone in attendance. If a councilman makes the motion to approve this or seconds it, it doesn't mean that they are in favor. It just means that we have to make this motion so that we can debate it. With that said, is there a motion to approve? Made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Paulson.
Mayor,
Councilman
may I
Paulson.
ask, and correct me if I'm out of line, what I'd like to do is make an amended motion to include the covenants. Is that proper or improper?
The chair is going to say that I want the hearing to have a fair shake on its own. Just straight up, because that's what everyone came for tonight. If during the course of that conversation and a possible amendment on a covenant comes up, then we will take that as it comes. But I think that it's for the public and it's for the council to have a hearing upon what we were presented today before we start talking about amendments, because that would completely change the motion. So it would be my intent to just proceed with the public hearing or with the council action now. Let us vet it, and then in our deliberations, if we feel an amendment is necessary after that point, then I will take that motion.
I'm fine with that, thank you.
Thank you. With that said, the chair is also going to encourage the council to use at least the first part of this to ask questions. Don't state your opinion. Let's get to the bottom of the matter. Let's ask questions. I want all questions directed through me because different people in the audience might be able to answer different questions, and I want to have that ability to not have a free-for-all for the microphone. With that said, open it up for questions from the council. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to ask a question to city staff. If this violates any conditions of a rezone per our ordinances or our policies, and if so, or if not, what would be the official recommendation of our staff?
City Manager Mack, you can answer that or direct it.
Thank you, Councilman Paulson. It is my understanding that this request does not violate any of our policies and meets the criteria of a rezone. It would be staff's recommendation to approve. However, it is not our job to make those decisions. We make recommendations to the governing bodies, which we did to planning and zoning as well. But I will defer to our Public Works Director and our Community Development Manager, who may be able to provide more detailed information.
Public Works Director Von Eyde, do you have anything to add?
Only that, that's always a difficult or challenging question to get asked staff, and I just want to emphasize that to the city manager's response. It's completely based on the objective criteria that we as staff have to go through to assess an application before even bringing it to the Planning Commission. And those objective criteria in this particular application have all been met. There's one exception as far as our guiding documents go. The Comprehensive Land Use Plan does identify this area to be the currently zoned R2 zoning district. So that is the one exception that I would say. That's not a hard, fast requirement, however, that's adopted in a zoning ordinance, but a guidance document that the Planning Commission and the City Council use as such. So with that exception noted, yes, this application does meet all the other requirements for a rezone.
Follow-up, Councilman Paulson. Councilman Danforth has asked for a question.
Mayor, if I can, because I'm coming in via Teams here, if I could maybe ask 2 or 3 questions.
You just tell me when you're done.
Okay. Well, boy, don't put it that way. Otherwise, we'll be here forever.
Let me rephrase. When you're done with your 3 questions.
Well, first of all, I'm going to make a comment, and to Mr. Bluedorn and Mr. Kopman, I believe, that I'm going to make a statement here in a minute, and there's nothing personal about it. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with anything, but it is something that is something that we have to consider. Anyway, so my question is, first of all, the 12 plexes that you have, are they 6 units on each level?
Mr. Bluedorn, he can't see you nodding, so you're going to have to come to the microphone and answer.
Yes, Mr. Danforth, 6 units on each level.
Okay. And I believe in the last meeting in the first reading on this thing, you had referenced something about adding garages.
Yeah, we
on the plan that I've looked at today, I don't see any on there.
No, we don't have any garages currently. We did have the thought that if this was too dense and we had someone made the suggestion that we remove them twin homes and put garages down there, less units, more garages, that could be an option as well. But right now it is not, they do not have garages for those apartments.
For any of the apartments?
Just the twin homes.
The 12 plexes?
Any of the 12 plexes, correct.
Okay. So now this is a general question, and this is where I don't want you to be offended, Mr. Bluedorn.
I won't get offended. Yep.
Okay. What's being suggested is that covenants would be established after this land is approved to be R3. And as we sit here today, we don't know necessarily exactly what's going to be in those covenants, or if they're even going to occur. So an action tonight to approve the R3 without covenants in front of us, seems like we got the cart in front of the horse.
Yeah, that kind of came as a proposal from the realtor, the listing agent, and we visited about it just today. So that was new to us too as well, to even consider that. I wasn't sure what the procedure was, I guess, from the city, but if it would need to get tabled until those covenants are read and approved, I guess, from this council or from the city, we could table this until next month. If I guess I don't know how that all works, but you guys would have to tell me how that works. But we're open to however that works.
Okay. Well, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a general comment here. Twice this past year, on issues that have come before the council, we have been communicated to as to the use of the comprehensive land use plan, and that we just approved a new version of that. I don't exactly know when that was, whether it was early in 2022 or sometime in 2021. I don't know that, but and a couple of the comments that were made were, look, you paid to have this done. People put a lot of time into this thing. You've got to have faith in it. Now, I know it's not. I know the comprehensive land use plan isn't an absolute, but it should be a pretty darn good reflection of how we want to develop our community. In this particular case, now we're saying on the latest comprehensive land use plan that this is an R2. And that, but yet we're being asked to change that and not consider the comprehensive land use plan. That's just a comment. Mayor, I'll concede at this point until probably a little bit later.
Thank you very much, Councilman. Any further questions, Council? Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I would ask Mr. Bludorn if you would step up again. I'd like you to address Mr. Odland made the comment that he did not have a chance to see or didn't see these revised drawings until just a couple hours ago. As a council member, I didn't see them either until early afternoon. I guess, I think in fairness to you, I guess I'd like to have you respond to that if you could.
Yeah, so we just got these revised plans at noon. I did send them off to Mr. Tanner. I don't know if I spelled the email wrong. I do have proof. I sent them right away. You were the first person I emailed. From Danforth. Okay, I got that. We spoke a couple weeks ago before the holidays, and Mike shared his email with me, and I sent him my screenshot. I said, I know I sent him mike.tanner@alphamediausa.com. Okay. Okay, I do want to let you know I did share them to you. I apologize, it was short notice. I did explain in there. I said, we just got them. The lumberyard just finalized these at like 11:30. I shared the email a little after noon to you, and I shared them to a number of the councilmen as well. So, I wanted to say, I don't know if I messed up and spelled something wrong, but I did share them, and I wish I could have shared them 2 weeks ago. I didn't have them, I guess. Okay. Before it was just the 5-plex buildings, and we received these plans today.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'd like to now address Mayor, if I might, now address my next question to Mr. Odland. As far as, I realize you haven't seen these plans very long. What is your initial gut reaction to the revised plans?
I think it shows a willingness by the developer to concede some things. But again, a couple of hours ago when I first saw these designs, and Mr. Danforth will confirm this, I sent a text message to Mike saying, does this conform within the R2 zoning rules? And he said no, because of 4 12-plexes. And this comes down to fit. To fit. It's R2. It's been R2 for 8 years. I'm not in the development business, so I can't tell you why no one has been able to develop this R2. But it's the right fit. Maybe we just need to find the right developer, whether it's Mr. Bluedorn or somebody else to develop at R2 because, as Mr. Wallen said, as Mr. Van Duzen said, as I've said, it's what fits the neighborhood. One thing I didn't mention when I spoke earlier, this land, this 3.6 acres, it is literally the last piece of undeveloped property up in that neighborhood. And it's been my contention all along that if you are going, in an ideal world, if you are going to build high-density housing like this, in a perfect world, it would be the first or one of the first things in a neighborhood, so the follow-up development that comes in behind it, those folks know exactly what they're getting. Myself, my neighbors, I've been in my house since early 2015, so just about going on 8 years, and I never had any expectation that I would be 8 years long fighting to get this piece of property developed responsibly, how it should be developed as R2. I'm getting an answer to your question, Glenn. Sorry about that. You're asking about what is my reaction? Well, like I said, I think it shows a willingness by the developer to meet our concerns, but when rubber meets the road here, when you take away one 12-plex and replace it with 3 twin homes, how much does the density change? Not very much. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess I'd like to, Mr. Bluedorn, I'm sorry to keep you coming back and forth. I guess I'd like to ask you now, I mean, you said that you could configure this to conform to R2, but you were concerned about what the aesthetics of it would look like, or I guess expand on that comment a little bit. I mean, if R2 can work for you, why aren't you going down that road?
Well, there's a couple different. Yeah, thank you. There's a couple different concerns with it. The construction costs of R2 is much more per unit. In order to do that, to make it feasible, we'd probably have to go with 4-bedroom units to make your, per bedroom on your revenue. A twin home is about $200,000 a door, call it, to build, where an apartment you can build for $120,000 a door. So now you can have stuff that fits the needs of what's needed for the housing in Watertown. The other thing is, I guess we just feel like for the feasibility of the project, that's probably the number one thing to make it go. And that's probably one of the questions one of the neighbors had said, that why has this piece never been developed? By the time you figure in your land costs and your infrastructure costs, you just have to have more units. It has to be more dense to make it pencil. I mean, that's the simple black and white answer, in my opinion. Just my opinion. And there again, if like, I'd love to sit down and have a pizza party with the neighbors and say, hey, could we put garages here? Like, just sit down and hash it out and try to get it to work and then bring it forward and get it approved. Like, that would be my ideal way to do it, sit across the table and hash out details. But if the 12 plexes are going to get shot down and it's only going to be twin homes, we'd have to go back to the drawing boards. And I don't know if it's the right fit for us. And maybe Mike is right. There needs to be a different developer on this. And I understand that completely. It just has to be a little more dense, I guess, for our team to move forward with something like that. And if you wiped out those 6 and you put some garages in, I think it would still work fine. We thought that the twin homes would be a nice buffer with the R2 up against there, but garages would maybe be a nice buffer for them too. You'd have block some headlights and cars, and I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, our thoughts on the 12 plexes being in a row like that along the north edge, it nearly identical to the property to the east of it, with the multifamily being on the north edge and then the twin homes being on the south side. You're basically just extending what is already done just on the east side of this current property, extending it over a little bit and finishing this off.
Councilman Villar?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment. I'm assuming that regardless of, whether it's, R2 or R3, that dirt pile that's in there now would disappear as part of the development, because I got to believe the neighbors cannot be happy about that.
Yeah, so we don't currently own the land, but the developer that owns it, I'm assuming he has a plan to rectify that.
Okay.
So,
can I keep the floor yet, Mayor?
Yes.
I've got a few questions I'd like to address to our staff, if I could.
Actually, Mr. Bluedorn and Mr. Copman, just stay there for now.
I guess I'd like to address the first one to our Public Works Director. You know, we've been talking about the traffic issue up there, 14th only being a half street. I guess you're our traffic control expert, our traffic flow expert on our staff. I guess I'd like to hear what your comments are to those concerns, Heath.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. Since the first reading, I've done a little bit more research on that. I did make some general comments at the first reading. I looked into it from a more in-depth technical standpoint. Now I'll preempt my talking points with the fact that I realize this is a half-built street section, meaning the north half does not have curb and gutter. It's got a rural section nature to it where there's a ditch there. The south half does have what we'd call an urban street section where there is curb and gutter. So my comments are based on the fact of the amount of street that's there. And we've got 22 to 24 feet of pavement width. What that allows for is two 11 to 12 foot lanes, depending on where you're at on the stretch of road. So if you look at it simplistically that way, a 2-lane road does have quite a bit of traffic volume capacity. It can carry quite a few vehicles per day. The amount that this road's currently carrying is a little over 900, according to our most recent traffic counts that are on the DOT's website. And the total volume that a 2-lane street could carry varies anywhere from 10,000 to 14,000 vehicles per day. Now, we obviously have all kinds of examples of roads throughout town that are simply 2 lanes. Take 14th Avenue west of 19th Street. It's a 2-lane configuration. Portions of 1st Avenue are 2-lane. Portions of 4th Avenue and 3rd Avenue, all heavily used streets that carry anywhere from a couple thousand up to 6,000 vehicles per day. So from that standpoint, I don't see a traffic volume issue here. But again, I use the caveat that I wouldn't suggest putting 10,000 vehicles a day on a half-built street section either. But I would say that this could convey enough traffic to sustain additional development in this particular location.
Thank you. Another question for you, Heath. There's the bike path up there. Is there any concern expressed by staff as far as the proximity of that bike path to the proposed development?
Not from a staffing standpoint, operationally. We don't see any concerns with that.
Okay. Can you just explain to us briefly, is there a difference in water retention, et cetera, between the R2 and an R3?
So the runoff management requirements are identical. The physical improvements are what would be changed from an R2 to an R3. The developer is responsible in this particular drainage basin to detain the minor event and provide water quality features in their detention pond. They do not have to design to a major storm event here. I'm getting into some technicalities that have to do with engineering and runoff, but long story short is they don't have to build as big of ponds because of the basin that they're in. We want the major storm event to go undetained, so they don't have to detain the major storm event, but they do have to detain the smaller 5-year minor storm event. We have seen with the previous owner a development plan that showed that detention being 100% contained on this site. I'm speculating, but I don't doubt the current or potential owners could also submit a development plan that shows the detention contained on this site. I don't see that being an issue. I think that they can meet the criteria that are put forth in the ordinances and engineering design standards.
Any concerns about snow removal? Access for, garbage collection, et cetera?
Yes, again, I'll go back to the 2019 plan that was approved under the previous owner. There were some stipulations that we were having to work through. We didn't get as far as solidifying them because the plan didn't get carried out. But the snow removal, there was proposed to be a private street in there, which much of this, based on the plan I've seen so far, looks like would be all private. There's no public streets proposed. So it'd be up to the property management team to handle their own snow removal. Whether they haul it out, which is likely they'll have to do, or find place on site to store it.
Okay. I think I've just got one more question, Mayor, if I could. I'd like to address this one to our city attorney. It's actually kind of a follow-up to what Councilman Tupper and Danforth both alluded to. Can we, I mean, we're acting on a zoning issue tonight. I mean, can we put stipulations in that zoning change versus, I mean, for example, the, you know, whether it be the height of the building or concerns about parking on 14th Avenue, putting some kind of restrictive covenants. I mean, do we do that in a separate document, or can that be done as part of the zoning issue that we are discussing tonight?
Thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. Good questions. So you want to, I'll say a few things and then hopefully that will answer your questions. Anything further, in my opinion, would require an executive session because we're getting more into legal advice and going back and forth. But if you are doing covenants, you are in effect doing a conditional rezone, which isn't really the format of what we have before us today. But there are other zoning districts, I guess I would say, that allow for covenants to be a part of the process. And for that, I would refer to the Public Works Director to explain.
So when it comes to the covenants idea, I believe Councilman Danforth mentioned this earlier. If those covenants were to be a contingent item, that this approval is contingent on those covenants, that creates its own little dynamic that the attorney just cited, that conditional rezones are not something we want to be doing. Time and time again, they've been proven to get people's hands slapped, the governing body's hands slapped for doing conditional rezones. So we want to uphold the integrity of the zoning ordinance to that regard. The other thing with covenants is those aren't ironclad like a zoning district. They are administered by the property owners, and they become a civil suit when they don't follow their covenants. It's kind of like a homeowners association that we have several of within this community. The staff do not regulate the homeowners association covenants. We wouldn't regulate this property's covenants. If they didn't abide by their covenants that were filed on their property, it'd become a civil suit for whoever cared to bring up and bring suit against that property owner for not following their covenants. So I wanted to make that distinction too. And I don't know how far, Mayor, you'd like me to go on these other options, but I do have some thoughts that I think we would want to talk through too before any formal decision's made.
Yes, I'll grant you that leeway, but I would like you to answer a question that I have. So if in the course of a covenant and a civil action, excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with my voice tonight, but that would be up to, let's say, any one of these people in opposition in this room could file a civil action against the development then.
Correct.
And then it would go to court. That is the procedure.
Correct.
Okay. And that is the enforcement of the covenant.
Correct.
Okay. Now you may extemporize.
So we've talked about this covenant option. There's been a couple other discussions that have happened too, where the current plan that the applicant has before us, let me pull it up real quick here if I could, shows the twin homes to the south and the higher density to the north. Now in theory, what could have been applied for here is simply rezoning this northern portion to R3, leaving the southern portion as R2. If the applicant wanted to entertain that, I would suggest that the council would not table but postpone this action and have the applicant request that amendment to their application. And we could bring that consideration up at a subsequent council meeting after the proper public hearing notice has been posted and the 10-day regulation has been met. So what that would look like is the applicant would say, okay, we'd like to not take action tonight on the R3 for everything, but submit a revised amendment, zoning amendment to the council that shows this north portion R3, leaving the south portion as R2, as it currently is. But again, I wouldn't want the council to take action on this and have this fail if that's an option that the applicant wants to entertain, because if you take action and that fails, they then have to wait 6 months to reapply for that consideration, because it's another R3 application that our ordinances require a 6-month delay before an applicant could come back for something similar.
No, I'm done.
Okay, I have two councilmen who want to make comments, and actually one even preceded them for questions. I just want to explain something. I also am very interested in the covenant aspect of it, but I do not want to assume that just because it's on my brain, it's on the minds of everyone on the council. That's why I need to give it a fair hearing as it stands without getting it talked all about the covenant, because then once you're done talking about the covenant, then you circle back to the main motion, and then you've lost that focus. And that's why I am choosing to do it the way that I did. And also just want to say something. I don't know how the conversation is going to go forward, but there was already one comment that, or two comments, that our deliberation up here is not intended to be any slight against our city staff. I want to make that very clear that none of us up here doubt your ability, your expertise, your knowledge in this matter. I'd just say this is a reason why communities have elected officials, so that they are making the decisions not necessarily based upon what it says in a rule book, but also what it says with people's lives. It's just a slightly different aspect, and that's how America works and Watertown works. So that's just explaining that. So I do have Councilman Tupper and Councilman Danforth who want to make comments, but first Councilman Schutte had preceded them.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate your perspective on that, because sometimes this can become an us against them, city against developer, developer against neighborhood, neighborhood against city, and this isn't that. This is, so far, it seems to be a good conversation. For me to make my decision here too, I have a question I want to ask on a few points. One was already on the traffic flow, so you've already addressed that. But to make a good decision is to look at it, not to be biased, but to look at it from every perspective and really get a good view of this. So that's how I'm going about this. It was mentioned that reasonable population density in an R2 is what is being, for the neighborhood, people representing the neighborhood, they want a reasonable population density. One thing that was mentioned was high density housing. So maybe this question would be for Public Works Director or someone. What exactly is high density housing? And then I have a follow up with that answer.
Well, I think that's a little bit subjective or arbitrary on how you would, what threshold triggers high density. From our zoning ordinance, your R1 is your lower density, your single family residential. Some would consider R2 the next step up being high density as well, because you're allowing duplexes up to fourplexes on that property. And then R3, where you can go up to, as big as some of the apartment complexes that we've seen built recently. Some would wait and say, okay, then you're at the high density level. But really that statement, if you just think of it in general common sense terms, it's just, the higher that zoning district goes, the higher number of residents you can have on that property is all it boils down to. I don't know if that helps answer your question, Councilman.
It does, thank you. And follow up with that. Then, so based off that, now granted, some of this is just planning it out. There's nothing cemented. But with this current plan here, the population of, if R2, staying at R2, and we were to fully develop as an R2, there was a number, I can't remember what the number was, if it was how many units could be in there, if there could be an answer to that.
Mr. Bluedorn, I remember that you mentioned how many that you would be able to fit in there under R2, and it wasn't considerably different than the plan that you had offered here. But
it was about 80 bedrooms.
80 bedrooms, okay.
Yep. And right now we have about 84 bedrooms.
Okay, so it'd be similar right now. So population-wise, reasonable population. This is the current plan is that was in front of us is for a similar number as if it was maxed out in an R2. So I'm just kind of looking at the numbers, looking at the size. Granted, I myself would not like to see a high monstrosity either, as well as an apartment complex. But I'm looking at the traffic flow from the data that was given, looking at population, what's considered appropriate population, if it can be done in a way that like I say, would match even an R2 potentially fully developed. I'm just looking at it. I'm not having a decision right now. I'm just saying I'm looking at it from every perspective. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Tupper.
This is for Public Works Director Von Eye. What's the max you can do on a R2? Is that 4 or 6 for an apartment unit? Fourplex, sixplex?
I believe it's fourplex. Is that correct, Community Development Manager Hinton? Yes, fourplexes.
So, in all reality, they could split these into fourplexes, have that many more, and still have the same density.
If I remember right, a fourplex would require a conditional use. Right now, an R2 would be approved on there, and which would be a twin home. A fourplex would need a conditional use to get that approved. Is that correct?
That is correct as well.
But my point is, though, the density wouldn't change.
Yeah, correct. Yep. I mean, we could
I mean,
build
that's what I'm trying to
fourplexes
get
or
at, is the
duplexes.
density would be the same no matter what you build, whether it's fourplexes, these 12plexes, or twin homes. The density is a mute issue, basically.
Yeah, and I guess the big thing, I think the big unknown, like you guys have pointed out and some of the neighbors, is once it's zoned R3 without covenants and restrictions, you could get north of 80 units, which in turn could be 160 bedrooms, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I don't know how to say this, but I guess I'll sign a napkin right now, no legal stuff, just over here on the desk, saying this is what we'll do or less, like if we have to do garages down here, if that would help people move this forward and try to get it done, we're fine with that, and that'd be less units, 6 less units, 12 less bedrooms. These are 2-bedroom twin homes. They're a little smaller. But anyways.
Mayor, I got a question for you, please.
Yep.
In light of the short notice, I mean, I got the notice around 1, 2 o'clock today, and in respect for all the residents that are here that didn't get the notice until a short period of time before this meeting, and I'm going to lean on the mayor here a little bit. I think we see in the crowd that everybody's coming together a little bit closer every time we visit. And that's what we want to see in our community, is people work together with developers, landowners adjacent. God, I don't even know if I can make this suggestion, but I'm going to try anyhow. But I would love to see this somehow get tabled and brought back to us, and have you guys have an opportunity to visit amongst yourselves. I think it'd give the whole thing, a more fair look at, I mean, your guys' plan is great. I mean, I love it, but I'm not the one living across the street from it. So it's easier for me to say that, but I think we've came a long ways in just the last 2 weeks, so I don't know if that's a fair statement or not.
No, Councilman Tupper, in fact, I will just actually say I was going to hold off my comments until later, but that has been my desire ever since I saw this plan brought forward several hours ago. And I want to thank everyone here who has testified, because there's been no hardcore, we hate the other side, or we don't want any development, or we don't want to work with homeowners. That has not been the sentiment. I have heard talks on the covenant. Mr. Bluedorn, you yourself said I would like nothing more than to talk with them and hash it out. I like that sentiment. That, to me, is what Watertown is about, is trying to find the best path forward that takes into consideration all concerns. I think this is a very good step forward. I think that the covenants would go a long way to easing my concern, but I hope also that everyone understands why I did not want to guide the conversation in that way, because I thought it would be unfair to other councilmen. But with that said, the proper action, which I did look up prior to this, would not be tabling, it would be defer action 2. But with that said, defer action 2 date certain, which would be the next council's meeting or the one after that. So with that said, I would ask our city attorney to just confirm if my interpretation is right, because our finance officer, Bob Zine, is telling me I'm wrong. It would be the next meeting after that.
Yeah, we just wouldn't have enough.
Oh, we would have to do a public notice.
Yep.
So, city attorney?
Yes, and also keep in mind that at the next council meeting, depending on what you choose to do, you would probably still need another public hearing if you were amending the ordinance, because you're not amending it now, you're deferring action. So let's say you deferred action to the next council meeting, now you've decided you're going to amend the ordinance as presented, because that's what we still have on the table, nothing's happened yet, then you would need another public notice. And that's really for the public and for the, because they have to have that right to be heard on the amendment of whatever it is.
City Attorney, clarify something for me. When we were talking about this, I did not come to full understanding of this. There is a difference between if City Council amends it versus the developer, Mr. Bluedorn, comes forward with an amended motion on the development. Because then it's his development being changed. He's the one instigating it, not us. And then also, let's say if the council did, what would be the timeline on if we were to amend it?
Right, so they are foreclosed if you guys deny it. If you guys deny it, then they are foreclosed for 6 months from coming forward with a substantially similar application. However, the what I'm going to call the PUD concept is not a substantially similar application. That's a whole nother zone and a whole nother, and does require covenants. So they would be able to bring that without waiting the 6-month period. If council initiates its own amendment to the ordinance, it just requires another public hearing because in essence you're addressing the fact that, like we've talked before, you're surprising the people who have come forward. They came forward on one, you've said, well, we're kind of keeping part of it and we're changing part of it, and if it's substantial, then you just need to notice it up for another public hearing, just one, and then that way they have an opportunity to come back having now considered what your amendment proposal is.
I'm not going to put you on the spot or anything, but what, Mr. Bluedorn, what would you say to a PUD proposal or any of the procedures that we were talked about?
It's my understanding that with a PUD proposal, you would need 5 acres. This is 3.6.
Okay. Director Von Eyck?
Not to get too many details of these options because I have no idea what the applicant is thinking right now, but if this did get postponed or delayed action, we could talk through these options with them, the 3 being this covenants that I as staff am less comfortable with just because of the nature of it. I think that if we wanted to formalize this, it would be through the planned unit development process, which would have to go back as a new application to the Planning Commission, where this plan would be solidified and this would be all they could do on their land if this were approved through the PUD process. That would help lock that in a lot better than, and would be regulated by the city a lot more than covenants would be. And then there's the other option of shrinking the R3 zoning, like I mentioned earlier. You could keep the south portion R2 and shrink the rezone portion to just be that land adjacent to 14th needed for the 12 plexes. So really there's those 2 options and then the covenants idea that could be talked through with the applicant, but again, I would want them to steer that discussion with us on what their desires are.
Thank you. Mr. Bluedorn, Mr. Kottman, without leaving the stand, I would like to ask for a member of the opposition, a spokesman, knowing that one person can't know every thought of the opposition, but if one of you could come forward and just give some of your thoughts as to a PUD proposal, a go back and force covenants and then bring it back, anything like that.
My first question would be if there is city language that says a PUD requires a 5-acre footprint of land, is that locked in? So a PUD in no way, shape, or form would even be able to be considered? That's my first question. And while we have a captive audience of people from our neighborhood here, if somebody can explain what a PUD is.
Director Von
Eyck. So to the first question, the 5-acre rule, yes, that is an ironclad rule. It's part of the ordinance, so it's nothing that the Planning Commission or Council can just wave a wand. They would have to change the ordinance. However, we have been creative with that requirement where you use adjacent land as part of that rezone. Now, in this case, it's city land adjacent to this property, so you could carve out 1.3 acres of the city land that's zoned ag and make that part of the 5-acre PUD requirement. So I do think we have a means to get there if the applicant wanted to proceed with the 5-acre PUD plan. Now, as far as the approvals go, I'm sorry, Mike, your question specific to that?
There are, and I don't know a lot about planned unit developments, and I'm sure there are people in the audience here that probably don't know anything. So if you could just explain what that is.
Yes, planned unit development is some consider it a zoning district, but really it's an overlay to the zoning district that lets the developer, I'll call it what I think it is, bend the rules. They get to put their own plan together and do what they want in that land, so long as it meets certain criteria that are okay with the planning commission and ultimately the city council. So for instance, this plan we have up on the screen, they could bring this exact plan forward to the planning commission and say, this is our PUD plan for our PUD zoning application. Because unlike all the other zoning districts, they're not blessing a plan, they're blessing the zoning. A PUD, they're blessing the plan too. So they're locked in, the applicant is locked into only doing what their plan shows. That's the benefit, kind of the middle ground where you can work through concerns like this, where the developer brings forward a plan that's more amicable to the neighborhood, that goes to the planning commission, that rezone to PUD gets approved with this plan, and that gets carried on to the council, and the council then takes subsequent action to formally approve it. The difference between that and zoning is the zoning, the developer gets to use A to Z acceptable uses on that land based on that zoning district. It's a lot more free reign with just a rezone. The PUD locks it in per the plan.
Thank you. As Mr. Bluedorn mentioned, we had a brief conversation after the first reading, I think, Kellen, right? We had a brief conversation, and I was under the impression that we may not even be here tonight, that it might be pulled, and it's fine that we're here. And Kellen at that time mentioned the possibility of a PUD, and we don't need to get into this conversation now, but I told him I can't speak for the whole neighborhood. I'm kind of the guy that talks on the radio, so I'm the guy talking here tonight, but I don't want to make decisions for an entire neighborhood myself. That's not going to happen. That's not what I'm here for. So if we get to a point where we're negotiating with the developer on what could fit, whether it's a PUD or something else, I want buy-in from everybody here, because if something gets built and they don't like it, I don't want everybody mad at me. So, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Ditto. I'm going to, yeah, and I'm going to go to Councilman Danforth here in just a moment. He's been waiting patiently. Then Councilman Paulson. I'd just say that is my desire, is if some kind of an agreement could be made. And I really think it's in the best interest of everyone, because even if we vote this down tonight, 6 months from now, it might be back. 6 months after that, we've already heard the frustration of the adjacent landowners about how this has come back. If we could somehow come with a proposal for development here, not only does it get development for the city of Watertown, but it allows the homeowners a chance to have a say in what development is there. Because if this comes back in 6 months, a year, 2 years, and it's just, again, a proposal for R3, then we're back right where we began. At this point, right now, you have a developer who's willing to work with you to possibly come to an agreement. In my mind, that would be the best case scenario going forward, because it gets us the development, it also protects the landowners. But with that said, that's my desire. How that looks, I don't know. Councilman Danforth. And I apologize for intruding my comments on that. I almost always wait to the end.
Okay. Well, here's the thing that we got to keep in mind. I've heard a lot of different things, and the issue is density. And whether it's the southern part remains R2, and the top, the northern part is R3, and all we're doing is, I hate to say it, but we're just putting lipstick on a pig here, right? So all we're doing is we're just changing it, semantically, but really we aren't changing the plan. You go to a PUD, there's still going to be economics that are associated to this thing from the developer standpoint. So to go to a PUD or to go to a northern part that's R3 and southern part, there's still, if I hear correctly from Mr. Odland and the others, the density is the density. But I am going to pose a question back to the people that are there because I can't see them, and that is this. There could be approximately 20 duplexes built on that 3.66 acres. That's 84 bedrooms. Or 80 bedrooms, I'm sorry. And we're talking about 84 bedrooms now. So that density really isn't going to change other than the fact that it would be duplexes and maybe fourplexes versus what you see here. But you're going to see a lot more buildings versus the open space. Now, I agree with everybody that, in my opinion, the best way to handle this is for us to get people that are interested sitting down and see where we can get on this thing. But if there is not a move off of the density, then we're probably wasting our time. If the developer's saying this is where I've got to be, and the adjacent homeowners are saying no. Otherwise, and I'm all for that. I think that's the way to do things. It's an effective way to get things done, but we're not. These other options don't pose anything unless we can get off the 84 bedroom density, the overall population that might be here. My major concern with this is the fact that it isn't the traffic. I think that's a non-issue. Water runoff, non-issue. I do think that the density is an issue. My bigger concern in the past has been what the height of the buildings could be in this area. Because to me, that's what exacerbates any development in this area is what's allowable for height. The R2, I believe it stays at 35 feet or below, whereas the R3 is 55 feet. Well, that's a big difference when we're talking about what we're going to put into the middle of existing residential areas. So I do want to pose this question to those that are here that are opposed to this, and I'm going to ask a question. So you would be okay with 80 bedrooms in 20 duplexes, and how does that differ so much from 84 bedrooms across 7 buildings?
I would allow Mr. Odland. Did you want to take that? I mean, and knowing that you can't speak for everyone.
Yeah, well.
I don't mean to put anybody on spot. To me, that's a legitimate question.
What's the maximum number of units on an R3?
Director Von Eye?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. I don't know if Community Development Manager Hanton does.
When we drew this up, we were working with Brandy, and it's usually regulated by the parking. You know, so much parking per bedroom. You know, 1 bedroom, 1.5, 2 bedroom, 2, and Brandy's in the back too. Maybe she can help. I think the max this could be is real close to 80 units. 72 to 78 is what's in my poor memory, but depends on how many bedrooms. You know, obviously if you. Oh, you got it. Okay.
Brandy.
Thank you. And I don't have actually, Kellen summarized that pretty well, and we did discuss it. So it all depends on just the number of bedrooms that each unit will have. This lot is 157,000 square feet, and just with and it was the previous plan that they were utilizing 94,000 square feet, so 60% of the lot area. In the R3 district, you can have you can utilize 80%. You could have 80% lot coverage. So they were at 60% previously. And yeah, I have a few different notes here, but it's hard to really nail that down. I could do a quick calculation to say that if they were two bedroom dwelling units, just for the square footage, and I think it was 92.
Just to be clear, Brandy, to the councilman's question, you're looking at, if they maximize their developed area at 80% and they put a 55-foot maximum height structure on here, that's really the question, right? What can we maximize this site at as an R3 zoning?
Oh, for the height?
In totality,
Well, in height, it
maximum
returns
density?
the units, right? I mean, you do
Yeah.
4 stories, you could get 100 probably in here. If you had enough
Exactly.
1-bedrooms and studios, you could do underground parking. You could do all sorts of things
Yeah.
to get more parking spots. But that's not I guess that's not our goal. It
Yeah,
never
so
has
you'd be
been.
well
but-
over 100. I'm just talking a rough number. You'd be well over 100 units in R3 if they were maximizing this property to the R3 extent that they could.
Mayor, can I?
Would it be easy to say it could potentially be a lot more? Yeah.
Mayor,
Mike?
can I just ask a question of the neighborhood here while I have them here? And I
Yes.
I sense that we're going down a road toward this potentially could be tabled. So if I could just get a show of hands from people in our neighborhood who would, well, first I would ask, just want this to end and want to see a vote on R2 or R3 tonight. Who wants to see that? And by a show of hands, how many people would be okay with tabling it and as a neighborhood continuing to negotiate with the developer on something that we think we can all agree with? I think more people probably want to see a vote tonight, but I just asked the question to kind of gauge the temperature of the folks
Thank you.
who are dealing with this.
Okay. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. So, from the conversation tonight, we're obviously hearing that there's just a lot of animosity because there's a lot of trust issues from maybe previous developer issues. I don't know. We have a developer here saying that this is their plan, and we're still fighting over the density over 80 or 84 units, ultimately is what it comes down to. And I talked to 5 realtors myself of 5 different companies, and they all said that there was no effect to the value of a house with a buffer. So, I mean, we can say that. We can argue. You talk to 11 and you're a realtor yourself, but I'm going to go pick one of these 5 realtors and contradict exactly what you just said with that. So, yeah, that's, I guess, you don't know until you try to sell your house is what I'm trying to get to. I'm not trying to argue or start an argument. I did talk to 5 separate ones, and all of them said the exact same thing. But ultimately, I think we need to live by the integrity of the ordinance. We have ordinances and policies for a reason, and that's why I asked the staff what their recommendation was based on that, because it's not subjective, it's objective, and we have rules in place that they follow, and if it's followed, if we continue to say no, like we have in the past, making arbitrary decisions, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. That's when developers stop coming to town. That's when we get into lawsuits because we're not following our ordinances and we're making arbitrary decisions. We have a history of making arbitrary decisions that have affected our community for a long time. And that goes back to 3M and Cabela's and Super Target, and you could go back and list a lot of other developments that there's arbitrary decisions that they followed the ordinance on, but they didn't feel comfortable moving forward, and it's affected this community. So I asked if it violated any conditions to the rezone, and the answer is no. So if we say no today to these developers, I know for a fact that most developers in the future are going to bring everything as R3 and C3, and we'll see a million different rezones to conform to what the developer wants. Because this is only one example. We have another one, a rezone on the board tonight. Item E, actually, is the exact same request, and they're actually closer to R1 families than what we're talking about. We have a buffer here tonight. And yes, it's ag land, it's water. I get it. It's not the perfect buffer, but it is a buffer. But we have another item on the agenda tonight for the exact same request that's going to happen here. And if we say no to this one and yes to the next one, I have grave concerns about that because we're setting a dangerous precedent moving forward. Because again, it's coming to arbitrary decisions based on public outcry, which I'm not discounting any of your concerns because, like I said, I made a million notes. I did research. And I've talked to several other developers too, and if we go down this route, I just know we're going to suffer greatly going forward because everything's going to be backwards. So that's where I sit today.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Beeler.
Thank you. This is a question for our Community Development Manager, Hanton, if she could step up for a moment. Brandy, my question is this. How many duplexes could we fit on that property? I know Mike had mentioned the potential for 20. Is that true?
So there could be 15 lots, and so then that would be 30 duplex units.
I have a follow-up as well. Okay. So how many duplexes you could put?
30 duplex units.
30 in that space?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Per side, so that's not 60. Right, is that what you're saying? So it'd be 60 single units?
Well, so
30.
you're take that times 2, because you'd have, for a duplex, you'd have 2 units. Now, if you receive the conditional use for a fourplex, then you would have 60. I mean, you double that. And then, but a triplex or a fourplex in the R2 district is by conditional use, so that would be granted by the Board of Adjustment. And then there also is, in the R2 district, a row housing, a single family row housing development. So that would look something similar to what is developed up on 2nd Street in the Valley View Edition. So that would be another option too. But I think with the developer that this is their prototype with the 12-plex.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, just another question. This would be directed to the developer. Mr. Kellen, is it feasible? Would it be possible on the west end of this development to put duplexes on the west side?
Remove that 12-plex,
Correct.
replace that with duplexes coming down?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like it could be.
I mean, I could reduce the density.
I see your point, and
it
have
would
more of
give
a
that
buffer along everybody there.
To the folks to the west.
Yeah.
I mean,
you could maybe get 3 or 4 duplexes in there. You lose a few units, but I mean, Dustin, what do you think? Dustin's a...
I mean, that might be a compromise for...
Yeah,
for
no, I like
everybody.
that thought.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before I go back to Councilman Danforth, I just wanted to point out, my city manager leaned over and reminded me of this, that all of these discussions that we've been having, like what ifs, that's what a PUD is to come to an agreement on what can and cannot be there. So a lot of these ideas is something that could be hashed out and then brought back to us. We're not necessarily the authorities on planned unit development. I just want to remind the council, not to say that we're not able, but I'm just saying if this is our desire, if this is where people are going, that's the motion to be made, is to send it back to possibly to discuss how to make that happen. If that's the desire, I am not coaching you on what to do. Councilman Danforth.
Thank you again, Mayor. And I'm going to make a comment on the deferral thing. Personally, I believe that's what we should be doing here. But if we vote on it tonight, and if it gets voted down, there's a very, very high probability that everybody that's in that room tonight in opposition to this is going to be back at some point with somebody having a plan that needs to be considered by the plan commission or the council. if we take the time to delay the action on this and we have discussion and we sit down and we negotiate, now Mr. Beulah just brought up a good, one option to have some discussion on. If we're able to sit down and have some good discussion, do some negotiation, do whatever we do, if we're successful, then you don't see it coming back. Then it's done, and we know it's going to get built there. So to me, I know you want this behind you, but the greatest opportunity you have to get this behind you is to support the delay in the action. I will say this too, and this has kind of been an eye opener for me. Every time that we go from an R1 or an R2 to an R3, we have a problem getting into R3 in areas where they're developed. And to me, and this isn't for the people that are there, this is really for staff and fellow council members, but when we have a developed area like this, going from an R2 to an R3, with what is allowable in there, it's just too big. It's too big of a jump. And it's almost like we need like an R3A and an R3B. And because you got a developed area and now you can put X number of, I'm not even sure if there's a limit of what the number of bedrooms or units could be. And then you jump up to 55 feet right away in what's an allowable height. Well, that's a big jump. Both of those are when you're talking about an area that's really developed with the exception of this minor area. So I think we need to take a look at potentially looking at our ordinances to see if we need some a smaller step up from an R2 to an R3 than what we have now. But to me, we defer this thing and we sit down and we kick stuff around and see what we can get. Because I think we have to ask ourselves a lot of serious questions, and some of them I asked earlier, is really that the difference between 80 and 84, is that really what this is about? Would we want 15 or 20 or 30 buildings there versus 7? What's actually going to look better? So again, I will go back to something that I had said, and Mr. Odland had quoted me earlier, and that is we have an obligation, in my opinion, to support those people that have invested in their properties to a plan. And it's, like I said, I do believe it should be hard, but I don't think it should be a black and white line. I think this is a great opportunity for us to sit down and have some discussion, see where we can get.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair is now going to open it up. We've had a lot of questions, a lot of comments. The chair will open it up for a possible action brought forward by a councilman, because if a motion is made, then that motion is then debated. So, Councilman Tupper?
I would like to make the motion to defer this to the first council meeting in February.
Motion is made. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councilman Schutte. Yep. Okay, but this is not a substitute. This is not a substitute. Whatever. It's not a different motion. This is just deferring action upon the motion that was made. Okay. Now, if it was to rezone it or something like that, then that is a substitute. Whatever.
Maybe let me restate it, that my motion is to defer action on this until the first meeting in February.
Motion is made to defer the action until the first meeting in February, seconded by Councilman Schutte. Now we are going to talk about the motion. Councilman Paulson.
Mayor, thank you. I guess my question would be to the developer and to the owners. I mean, they did a hand raise vote. It sounded like the majority wanted a vote tonight. I don't know what the developers thought is, I mean, do you want to go?
I don't want to drag anyone else here again. I guess if I don't have to, if we're going to take this thing and cut it up 3 different ways and have about the same amount of doors on there, the density is going to be very similar. I guess it'd be nice to see a vote so we can start ordering materials if it goes, or move on, I guess. But again, if the board feels like, of course, I understand the blanket R3. That's the biggest issue at hand, and I guess I would hope that the neighbors would trust that we'd continue to work with them even on the final plans. If we could redraw it with duplexes and the next week and send it over and have them look at it, and I guess let them know our timelines if it does get approved. But that's a trust thing, and that's not obviously anything concrete, but we try our best. But
Councilman Villauer?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I guess my comment, I would love to see the developer in the neighborhood get something worked out. Defer it, yes, but I got a feeling that we're gonna sit down the first meeting in February, same group of people, we're gonna not see anything substantially different, and here we go again, debate it for a couple hours. I guess to me, I'd like to get this resolved one way or the other here and now tonight, and not kick the can down the road, because I don't think anything's going to change substantially. I'd love to see it, but I really have my doubts.
Can we call the question?
You can call the question, Counselor. I'm going to ask you to rescind that because there are other councilmen who might like to comment upon the motion. But Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. Question, Mr. Island, if you don't mind. As a representative of the homeowners, do you feel there might be some appetite for what I'd suggested earlier? Because that would give you a buffer from, with duplexes on that west side to most of the neighborhood, and the other would be contiguous to the R3 that's to the east. So you'd be on the south and on the west side. If that would work for the developers to give you that buffer, you don't want R2s and R3s in the backyard. You would have R2s. Is there an appetite with the group to consider that?
I'm one person, so.
I mean, maybe we get a raise of hands on that one. Is that out of order, Mayor?
I think it is, because you're trying to negotiate from a seat where you're asked to make
the reason I posed
no vote.
I posed that question because that could be the very thing that makes it work for everybody. And to me, if we can't do that now, if nobody's interested in going that route, we can find out here and now, and then we don't have to defer this. And I sort of have to agree a little bit with Councilman Villauer that chances are, if we don't compromise somehow, this is going to come back the same way.
City Manager Mack has something to say about this.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to comment that, as our Public Works Director mentioned earlier, it's really not in our best interest to do conditional zoning, and that's really what the path that we're going down. Well, will you agree to this? Well, will you look at this? The action in front of you is, do you agree or disagree with an R3 zoning? And if you agree with an R3 zoning, all of the things that are allowable within an R3 zoning would be allowed. I believe the developers when they say, this is what we want to do, where we intend to do this. They may sell it and decide to do something else. The discussions that we are encouraging the developer to have with the neighborhoods are discussions that should be had as it relates to either some type of neighborhood covenants, which Heath has talked about, or some type of planned unit development. Deferring action tonight would give the developers an opportunity to fully vet what their options are. Perhaps a PUD is the right path for them. I don't know. I'm not a developer, nor am I a zoning expert. I know enough to be relatively dangerous. But also would give an opportunity for the neighborhood to understand what that might mean. If I'm hearing my staff correctly, the only way to guarantee that certain conditions are met within a zoning district is to go down the planned unit development path. And there is a path for that process-wise. And that's what is in front of you. It's not this body's job this evening to determine what conditions are or should or shouldn't be. What you have in front of you is a decision on an R3 zoning request. And I say that with the utmost respect, but also to just make sure that we are moving down the right path tonight to get to a decision, whether it's yes or no, or deferring action. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Shetty, then Councilman Bueller.
Thank you, Mayor. I would concur with City Manager Mack. The purpose for deferring, from what I'm gathering, is just, I guess, yeah, we don't want to kick it down the road, but to buy us just a little more time, a few more weeks, to work together. To sit and visit a little bit more. We've got to this point because of emailing back and forth and getting people together in a neighborhood and working with the developer, working with the city staff. It's gotten us to this point. Just to get us to continue to work together and unify, one more shot to work through this. The deferring would help that process, and I think build unity in this. Again, who knows where it'll end up, but I'm for at least giving it a shot. That's just where I'm at with it.
Councilman Bueller.
Thank you. I just need a little clarification, and this would go to Public Works Director Van Nuys. I want to be clear on the city property in order to make the 5-acre minimum. Explain that and where that would be, and how that would how that transaction would look.
Yes, absolutely, Councilman Bueller. Pull up this other drawing here. So the blue outlined area is the land being proposed to rezone. That's a little under 3.7 acres. I think it's 3.66 acres. You could take any portion of this ag zone city land and add to this to make up your 5 acres, and that portion of city land would become part of the PUD overlay district. Now, in that, if we were to work with the developer to that extent, and again, I want to stress, this is all on them to come to us and request. I don't want to be driving the ship for the development for them. I just wanted to make that point clear. But if they wanted to go down that path, we would, upon their request, we would work with them to then show that on the PUD plan as simply green space. It would be left that way. It'd still be owned by the city. It would just have part of the PUD overlay on top of it. We have that luxury here because this is city-owned property. So you, as a governing body of this city property, we can zone portions of it PUD. We actually did something similar to the land out in front of Montgomery's Furniture here a few months back, where they did a planned unit development, and they included some of the city land to benefit them for their setback purposes of their buildings. We had that latitude to do that for the sake of the PUD to work out. Does that help answer your question, Councilman?
It does. Thank you.
Councilman Danforth, did you have something?
I do. I'm going to disagree with doing a vote. I don't, because the worst that's going to happen is we're going to try having some discussion, and if we come back the first week of February and we haven't reached anything, there's nothing appreciably new, there won't be any long debate because we've already had this discussion. At that point, if you're ready tonight to vote on it, you're going to be ready on that night to vote on it. So it's what it is doing, though, is it is taking something and trying to work through a solution, to get to a solution. And I believe that through no fault of their own, I think to have these drawings come in the 11th hour, so to speak, that everybody can't digest them, I think that's unfortunate. But that's all the more reason why I think we got to kind of stop and take a look at them and see where we can get. Because a month from now, if nothing comes out of those discussions, I don't see a long debate because we've already had the debate.
Thank you, Councilman.
I think we defer it.
Thank you, Councilman Danforth. And that's one of the reasons why I've given this hearing a lot of leeway tonight, because I think we can all agree that we don't want to be back here again. Now I understand, I'll make my comments further after that. Councilman Paulson?
I mean, I agree, delaying this isn't, I don't think it's doing anyone any favors, but, you know, the developer, he just said he wants to order stuff. A month makes a big difference for ordering things, especially with the delays that a lot of, you know, builders are seeing and stuff. But also to the respect of the people that are sitting out here tonight. They don't want to be back again. Is the feeling I'm getting, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I just think I would not like to delay this.
Thank you. Councilman Tupper, did you have something?
Just a quick question, or quick comment. When we look at the second reading of the very next one, basically, if we vote this right now, in all fairness to everybody, that would be the same vote on the next one. And we're two different situations. I think right now we have the opportunity to allow a great bunch of parties, and I mean, they're all citizens of the city of Watertown, and I think that's one thing we're known for is to be open-minded and work together. I think we have this opportunity. I'm sure the developer would be more than happy to host a meeting with the majority of them or whoever wanted to show up. You know, you can say, well, maybe that ain't going to happen, not enough of us can come, but you've all been in this room 3 times. So I think you'll show up if the developer wants to have a meeting. So I think that's just the best way of working through it. So,
Mayor, can I just say one thing quickly here? And again, I'm one person living up in that neighborhood, so I don't want my comments to be reflective of the whole neighborhood. But as I've looked at this progress and all of the conversation and debate we've had here tonight, again, this is just me personally speaking, I'm willing to sit down and try and find something that works for both parties. And if we come back in February and we say, you know what, we just couldn't find middle ground, well, at least we tried. And my fear is that I know nobody in my neighborhood wants R3. We all know that. You guys know that. But if we vote to defeat R3 tonight, as I've told Councilman Danforth, we still have this cloud of uncertainty hanging over us. And this has been going on for 8 frickin' years. Since 2015, we've been trying to get it developed. And if you guys take it to a vote tonight and vote it down, we still don't know what's going to go back there. And at least if we, this is again just my opinion, at least if we sit down with these folks and negotiate in good faith, at least we can know whether there's something that both parties can agree with. So again, that's just me speaking as one person, but I'm at least willing to sit down and see if we can find some middle ground here.
Thank you, Mr. Odland. I'm just going to make a comment, and we'll let someone say something otherwise, but otherwise I'd call for a vote. But it has come to me many times since being mayor that we have issues like this where you have passions high on either side, passions and money, for that matter. And I'm always one for finding some way of working together, and almost always that has been successful. I think we have momentum here for that potential to happen. What concerns me is the only potential for a long-term solution to this problem is to defer action tonight, in my mind. Because if we vote this yes, it immediately goes to R3, in which case all of you in opposition, you lose everything. You lose control over that, over what happens there. Mr. Bludorn could turn around and sell it. He could say, I don't want to come back to this council. I'm going to sell it to the next person, in which case you do not have a developer who has expressed interest in working with you. He could also just then pull the development, which is something that even the opposition has said that they're not against development. So in this case, and then also for the residents, the ones in opposition, if we vote it down tonight, all you buy yourself is 6 months. And then you might have another proposal, and then you also have, you know, it just comes back again. You have the momentum. You have a developer who says he wants to work with you. I think we would not be doing the best interest of, I know some of you might not agree with me right now, but I really do think that it's in your best protection to try to figure out a solution, because it's the only chance you're going to have on having a say at what goes in that section of land. And I do know, I pay attention to Councilman Paulson's problem with the developer. even a month is going to increase costs. It's going to not increase it as much as 6 months or a year. So I think that there's incentive on either side. That's how I feel about it. I am open to other people telling me I am not seeing it correctly. Mr. Kopman?
So if you were to vote this down tonight, it's my understanding that we could come back in 1 month with a PUD.
Okay, so that could be accurate. Wait, okay, yeah, I guess my question is in the process, because, so city attorney, would that then send it back to a PUD, would then it go through the plan commission and then back to the city council? I just think we've already had it in front of the city council. Our discussion has been different than the plan commission. If we can just handle it by dealing it here, sending it back to a PUD and bringing it right back to us, might be faster.
If it was a PUD, I would say it has to go back through planning.
It does.
They have to review, because it is so covenant-based, and a plan has to be approved. And it's, what I'm going to say is it is more than substantial change to to the current ordinance before you. It would be it's a totally separate district. So therefore, I would say it would need to go through planning.
But then would it also have to adhere to the 6-month delay?
I don't know
It
that
would
it
not.
would, no, it would not have to, I'm sorry. So no, it would not have to do with a 6-month delay.
So basically, the time frame would not be different if we voted it down and you came back with a PUD versus we deferred action. Mr. Kopman?
We would prefer not to do a PUD due to the additional architecture costs to design something to bring as a PUD. We'd rather make this work, just changing the zoning to R3, or maybe possibly doing the bottom third of the property R2. But the issue with doing the bottom third of the property R2 would be that if we do garages down there, the overall density would be lower, but we probably couldn't do that. Well, I don't know if you could just put, 18 garages in a row in an R2 zoning. I'm not sure what the rules are on that versus doing the twin homes down there, because the appetite might be to have less units and have garages down there. So I don't know. There's a couple issues like that I see with splitting it and doing the bottom third R2 or keeping it.
I would say, unless I'm wrong, and City Manager Mack, you can correct me on this, there is also one other course of action. We could vote, let's say, if we vote yes, you get your R3 zoning and you can move forward with whatever plans you want. If we defer action, you could then, 10 minutes from now, just pull the motion and just pull consideration. Could they not? And then you could just start over tomorrow with a different plan or something like that. That could potentially be the fastest. So if we deferred action, you then have the right, as the person bringing the request, to pull the request, and then that might actually be the speediest way to come back with a PUD or an alternate plan, or it also buys you the time to talk with them to see if you can come up with an agreement.
So in February, let's say we table this now, we visit with the neighbors, we get something figured out, find some common ground, we decide to go the route, no advice from council, alongside the covenants and restrictions with the developer. They agree to that. We all read through them. Our attorney drafts them. They're filed before we close on the land. We come to meeting in February. It gets voted. We wouldn't file it, obviously, until if it votes yes, and then we close. Is that what your thought is on tabling it, or are we? I know you can't give me direction, but there's PUD and there's the covenants option that we could do, which you've said it's not quite as ironclad as the PUD, but it does hold some weight. It does have, it's filed and it's on the property for life,
The path that you could go down if action is deferred would be to determine what path you want to go down, right? So, all right, we're going to defer action to February 6th, and you decide we want to continue to pursue the R3. Great. Then we come back here and we do an up or down vote. I don't vote. You could decide that you want to amend your zoning request to the bottom third remaining R2, R3, that would require another publication of a meeting. Or you could decide, hey, we want to pull this all together and go the PUD route. So really what it does is it gives you as the developer the opportunity to determine which path you want to go down. And maybe you know tonight and you can say, hey, we don't want to go down any of these alternate paths. We've decided that R3 is the best for what we need. And then I think the council would, take that into consideration and make their decisions appropriately based on that. So that's really what delaying action does. It's to the benefit of the developer.
But I also do think it's also in the benefit of the homeowners as well, because even if there is a no vote tonight, all it buys them is 6 months before this is back, potentially.
Can I say something quickly, Mayor?
Yeah, and everyone, I think everyone is in the mood to make it quick.
This has been the longest zoning question issue in the history of Watertown municipal government, I think. We've got that going for us. I wanted to say this earlier. I just want to thank all of the neighbors who are here tonight. As part of my job, I cover city politics and stuff like this, and you guys know that when you have zoning questions, a lot of time the chairs are all empty. We packed a planning commission meeting. We packed a first reading, even though we knew there wasn't going to be a vote, and we filled the room again tonight, and I was concerned about how weather might impact the turnout. But I think it just shows how invested we are as a neighborhood up there, how unified we are, and how we want to see this done right. And I want to also say that if it's tabled tonight and if we end up negotiating with the developers to see if we can find some middle ground, I don't think, and this is my personal opinion, I don't think either side might get all they want. But we got to find something, we get most of what we want, both sides, and in the end, it's something that we can live with. Agree?
Thank you. Yep. Council, any last words? Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that covenants have no bearing on city council. The city cannot take action on covenants, and they can also be changed by the landowners in the future. So, personally, I don't see where the covenants matter in this discussion as far as our vote goes, just because it doesn't have any bearing on us at all. So, you guys do what you want, but I would vote to vote.
All right. With that said, the motion made in front of us is to defer action until the February 6th meeting, or first meeting in February, in case I have the wrong date. All those in favor of deferring action, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion carries. This action is deferred until the first meeting in February. Thank you very much. We are going to change the agenda now. We are going to pay respect for Mr. Bartles, or Representative Bartles, to come forward. I'm going to give just a couple minutes to let the crowd disperse if they want to, and council to take a quick break. Okay, return to action to the city council meeting. As I said, barring any objections, I'm going to change the agenda and move item A to this next item, which is hearing from Representative Hugh Bartles. And just to let everyone know, he should be, come next week, the Speaker of the House, which allows a lot of power for him and a lot of sway over legislation, which is one of the reasons why we want to hear from him about the upcoming legislative session and how it impacts Watertown. Representative Bartles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. What a hearing. You guys should all be proud of yourselves. What a hearing. Very well done. Go home tonight and say, took a long time, but we did good work. So thank you. There's probably three things to talk about that affect cities. The first one is the governor's proposal to lower the sales tax on food. And that's items in the grocery store that make food, not ready-to-eat food, basically, is the best way to describe it. If you buy a pizza that's cooked at Hy-Vee, you'll pay sales tax on it. You buy a Snickers bar, it's ready to eat, you'll pay sales tax on it. You buy a frozen pizza you got to take home and bake, you wouldn't pay sales tax on it. So it's going to adjust that, and it does not affect city sales tax the way her bill is written. And that bill is already filed. It's either House Bill 1001 or House Bill 1002. It's one of the first two bills that were filed. There is also a proposed constitutional amendment to take the sales tax off of food that would include city sales tax. It would not allow any sales tax on food items. So there is that competing constitutional amendment that we may be voting on in 2024. Just something to put in your mind to see if it comes to fruition and whether they get the signatures for it. Another bill that Representative Calise from District 5 is doing is of interest to municipalities and counties and to state government as well. There's a $25,000 cap on buying goods and services. If you buy more than that at one time or equipment, you have to have a bid. And it's been $25,000 for several years. It really came to our attention through the municipal utilities here and a couple other municipal utilities. With the cost increases they're experiencing, transformers in residential areas are over that $25,000, and they're hard to find. So when they find one, then they got to bid on it, and a lot of time it's gone before they get the bid process done. So they were looking for some relief, and we're looking to raise that to $50,000, which would cover a stripped-down pickup, I suppose, as well now. You wouldn't have to bid it. Maybe, I don't know. Randy, would that buy a pickup? If it had vinyl mats and small enough engine and 2 doors instead of 4. So it's something we're looking at drafting and putting into the system. Byron Calise, the new representative from here, is ushering that bill through the House. And I'm kind of helping him. It's his first bill, so we're having a little educational experience with it, and we're doing real well with it. I think Byron will do a great job. Looking forward to working with Representative Calise. The third issue that really is of interest, and the mayor wanted me to talk about mostly, was in last year's legislature, we passed a bill that had $200 million in it for infrastructure, for affordable housing. We passed the bill not the way the governor wanted it. She controls moving the money. She said it wasn't written right, so she didn't move the money to the housing authority. And we've been negotiating with her on and off all summer and fall to figure out how to fix it. And we do have a bill that's going to fix that. And if you want to win $5, it'll probably be the first one that hits her desk. And so you want to bet on it's the first one out. It's going to start as a Senate bill, and they said they'd get it to us on Friday. So we'll receive it on Monday, and maybe we can get it to the governor on the following Friday. So we'll see how that works. But we're going to try and get that bill through. It's $200 million for infrastructure in affordable housing. It's $50 million in federal ARPA money that we put into it, and that's going to be passed out as grants by the South Dakota Housing Development Authority. The $150 million is general fund dollars from last year that is going to be passed out in grants and loans. It's split. 30% of the money can go to communities over 50,000 in population. 70% of the money has to go to communities smaller than 50,000. So there's a large amount of money that's available for communities our size and smaller. And it's for basically infrastructure, curbs and below. The asphalt, the sewer, the water, the natural gas, the electric, whatever comes into the infrastructure of the development. And it's aimed at affordable housing, not low income, but affordable. Because that's what we need to have people to take the jobs that we have open in South Dakota. We have about 27,000 jobs, they say most days, open in South Dakota, 700 or 800 people on unemployment. But we don't have enough housing. If we had all those employees move into our state tomorrow, we couldn't house them. So it's kind of a chicken and egg deal. We'll hopefully get some housing built by doing this. This is going to move very quickly. It's going to have an emergency clause on it. One of the caveats in it that we're only going to fund 30% of a third of the project. The governor, when she proposed it, wanted local governments to fund a third of it and the developer a third of it. The bill doesn't require that the local government do a third of it. At this point, it could in the end, but it doesn't right now. But if you have some money to put into a affordable housing project, I think it makes a lot of sense for our community, because those are the types of houses we need for the people that we need to have employed in our community. There's some great examples around the state. If you want to look at something, Spearfish has a wonderful example of an affordable housing development that they did out there with a developer. It's about 120 houses. It's got a park. It's got soccer fields. It's got baseball fields. It was land that the city owned. They did a TIF on it to finance putting the infrastructure in, bought the TIF themselves, made a deal with the developer to cap the price of the house. It also did a deal with a homeowner that it had to be owner occupied, and if they sold it before, I think it's 5 years, they have to pay some of the savings that they got on it back to the city. So it's really a win-win-win project for the community. So if you're looking for examples how to do that, to do a deal with a developer, there are 2 or 3 of them around the state you can look at for models. I think this is a big win for our state, and the state's going to put the $200 million into it, and I think it'll move through the legislature very quickly.
Thank you. For clarification, to alert the council, I believe that we all know, but also the public, I'm going to go to City Manager Mack to explain why I thought it was important to have Representative Bartles here tonight talking about some of this money, because Watertown has already applied for some of it.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And just to clarify, that the city itself has not applied, but we do have developers in town who have who applied when the bill was passed a year ago. And if you could, I asked your Senate counterpart today, and he said it was outside of his pay grade to provide me an answer. But one question we do have is those that applied when it was initially passed, do they have to reapply? Does their application maintain their spot in line? Because we assume that those dollars are going to get sucked up pretty quickly. And we'd just like to be able to advise them appropriately. Michelle with WDC is here also and has some similar questions, I'm sure. So whatever guidance you can provide to us is great. But we advocated heavily for this last year. We're grateful that there's some kind of resolution that has come between the legislature and the governor. And you're right, it's very impactful, and it'll make a big difference in our communities for sure.
I'm going to have to defer to Senator Schoenbeck's answer. It's probably above my pay grade as well. That's really going to lie in the Housing Authority, because they're processing the grants. Yeah, I know they passed some rules, and if they leave those rules in place, they will apply. I don't think the bill requires them to redraft very many rules. So we'll have, the best answer to that question would be pick the phone up and call the Housing Authority. So
I do want to thank Representative Bartles. He was the one who alerted us to what he thought the bill would look like at the end. I mean, we still don't know what it's going to look like, but this is part of the reason why Watertown has been able to jump ahead on some of these projects. And I also want to thank our staff, because I remember several meetings a long time ago where we talked about how and what to apply for. And I think Watertown is in a good position. We will never know until the decision is made. Any questions from the council?
Any questions on anything else?
Thank you so much, Representative. We wish you the best of luck out in session.
Thank you. All come and see us.
And I
I
think
think
it's
February 7th is Watertown Day.
February 7th is Watertown Day, I think? No, 15th. Okay.
What?
7th is the rib dinner.
Oh, rib.
15th is, I think, Watertown Day. Representative, thank you so much for waiting. Moving on to item C, PGNI, First Edition Annexation and Zoning. We have two separate motions here. An approval of resolution initiating annexation of attractive land in the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 27, Township 117 North, Range 53, west of 5th PM, Cottington County. And number two, second reading of ordinance establishing the zoning designation of R3 multifamily designation annexation for that property. They are going to be two separate motions, but I am going to open it up for conversation about them as a whole. And with that said, we will go for that conversation first to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is second reading, and with the second reading of the rezone comes with the resolution for the annexation, which of course is action item number 1. And if approved to be annexed through that resolution, we'd be asking to approve the second reading of the rezone for this property as well. The, excuse me, not a rezone, but establishing the zoning district for this newly annexed property. My mind was still stuck on the first item, I think, so I apologize. With that, I do have a map for reference here on the location of this property. I'll share it to teams here briefly. And the proposed annexation, as indicated in the application packet, is R3. With that zoning district, they would need a conditional use, which they will subsequently apply for the current use of storage units on this property. But again, they first need to get the land blessed with that appropriate zoning district, and then can work through the conditional use application from there. With that, I'll stand by with any questions.
Thank you very much. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and open it up for council action on item 1, an approval of the resolution. Motion made by Councilman Villauer, seconded by Councilman Tupper. I'm going to allow leeway. The council can ask questions and make comments about both actions, even though we only have one official action on the table right now. Any questions or comments, council? Councilman Villauer.
Thank you. Only question, and I know it's been asked at the Planning Commission as well as at the first reading 2 weeks ago, concerning the little island that it's now creating that will not be within city limits. Any comments along those lines? Whoever wants to handle that.
Would you prefer I go ahead with that, Mayor? Sorry, I was pausing for your blessing there.
No, I'm not going to be able to handle it. Director Von Eye, sorry about that.
Yeah, so my talking points, I'll just reiterate what I said last meeting for the public comment here on the second and final reading, and for the annexation. It is an anomaly to see islands like that left behind. You know, inherent to this application, that neighboring property owner had zero interest in being annexed in. The council has the latitude to deny this application and to, you know, send instruction back to the applicant to work with their neighbor to bring them in with them. It's not a huge detriment, but it is an anomaly. It's not part of your standard annexation and planning and zoning practices to create islands of unannexed land within your city limits. I would say that.
Any further comments or questions, council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the resolution. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Aye. Motion carries. Chair will now entertain a motion for the item 2, which is establishing the zoning designation. Motion made by Councilman Paulson, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any comments or questions, council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the zoning designation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item D is a second reading of ordinance 22-29, amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown for Midwest Evangelical Outlot, less New Life Edition and less New Life Second Edition, Midwest Evangelistic Outlot to the municipality of Watertown from I-1 light industrial to C3 highway commercial. We will go to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye, to start the conversation.
I'll start off by sharing my screen again with a map here. The Midwest Bible Camp location here along South Dakota Highway 20 on the southwest side of the highway, where it diagonals as you go out northwest of town. This particular application is for a rezone from, you can see the purple shaded area here, the lighter shaded purple is all industrial I-1 zoning. And this portion is being proposed to be zoned C3, Highway Commercial District. With that, I forgot to mention the last application. This did come with recommendation from the Planning Commission, I believe unanimously, and I'd stand by for any questions related to the rezone.
Thank you very much. Chair will open a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? Hearing none, I see a dog tail waving behind Councilman Danforth, but that's all cool. Or that's his tail. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the ordinance? So moved. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, second by Councilman Paulson. Any questions or comments, council?
Actually,
Councilman Vilhauer.
thank you, Mayor. Just a question, just for frame of reference and for my own benefit. Does part of the land that we bought along that stretch for the street department building, does that butt up against part of this land?
No, it does not,
It does
Councilman
not.
Vilhauer. It'd
Okay.
be off further to the southeast.
Okay. That's what I thought, but just wanted to ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item E is the second reading of ordinance 22-30, amending the zoning map of Watertown for Lot A Sutter's Plateau 5th Edition from R1 to R3. Public Work Director Von Eye, please explain this one to us.
Certainly, Mayor. This is up on the northerly end of town, west of Highway 81, which you can see on the east side of this map I've pulled up. And it's on the north side of 14th Avenue as you go west from Highway 81. There's a parcel of land there. The applicant would like to see rezoned from R1 to R3. You can see on the zoning map here also represented the adjacent property that is also R3 zoning district. There is R1 immediately adjacent to the west. Current use on that land is a site of a church, location of a church. And off to the northwest, you do have residential lower density R1 zoning there as well. This one also came from the Planning Commission with recommendation for approval, and I'll stand by for any questions on this.
Thank you very much. Chair will open a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the ordinance? Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Vilhauer. Comments or questions, council? Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I did reference this one as part of the last, one of the previous rezone requests for Eastwoods. This is the exact same request, and the reason I brought this one up is because this one doesn't have a room full of people, and if we don't have the same concerns as we do about this one as we do about the other, because this is the exact same road, just further west, it really concerns me from the council, and that's why I brought this one up. Because if we don't have the exact same concerns, just because there's not a room full of people here, I think we're making arbitrary decisions, and that's what I was fighting against in the first point. Not that I'm against anything or for anything just because of what it is, but I just wanted to point that out. That's why I directly referenced this one.
Thank you. Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess along those lines, I mean, we have followed the process that is laid out for an action such as this. I mean, the immediate neighborhood was contacted, I assume. Can I ask any comments or concerns expressed by the neighbors on this one?
Yes, to confirm, yes, all notices were sent out as according to state statute and city ordinances. And as far as any feedback, to my knowledge, no, none is received on this application. And Brandy's confirming that in the back of the room for me.
Okay.
So,
okay. I mean, I hear Councilman Paulson's concerns, but I think in my thinking that as long as we follow the process and no objections raised or noted, I'm okay with it.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We're on to item F, a first reading of the Park Board Ordinance Revision. City Manager Mack, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. This has been a topic of discussion for quite some time, and we're grateful that Lisa, having come on board, was able to dedicate pretty substantial time to this. Now that we are a city manager form of government, that gives us certain leeway and opportunities with our different boards and committees. What you have in front of you is a restructuring of the park board to an advisory board. If you look through the red line, you'll see that there were quite a bit of authorities that the park board had, which at times would be in conflict, could be in conflict with decisions that the council would make, and in my opinion, gave authorities that ultimately should be council decisions. This is modeled after other city manager forms of government within the state. And myself and Dusty and Lisa are available to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is just a first reading, discussion purposes. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just reading through it just briefly, for noticing the changes, but in 14.0102, it says that the mayor, with approval of the council, shall appoint 7 members to the board, each of whom shall be a duly qualified elector and resident of Watertown. The only reason I question that is on other boards we have allowed, including airport board and the plan commission, we have allowed at least one not being a resident of the city itself. I didn't know if that's something we wanted to look at for this one. I don't know if it applies, but it's just something that maybe we should look at.
That certainly is up to your purview. I think our thought process, as compared to the airport or the planning commission, oftentimes those boards work within confines that touch areas outside of the city limits, where Park and Rec is within the city limits. There certainly could be value in having someone who isn't a resident serve on that board. It's really whatever is your pleasure on that. It's pretty typical to see just a resident of the community. So.
And I'll just say, Councilman, that one also did catch me, and I thought about it, and in the end, I thought it was just fine to keep it as a resident of Watertown, because while we allow exceptions on very few other boards, they are exceptions to the rule. I think the rule is still a pretty good one. Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. The only question, well, 2 questions. One, do we really want 7 people on that advisory board? That just seemed like an awful lot of people to try to pull together, and at one time it's hard to get people in place as it is, and now we're going to get 7 of them. And then the only other question I had is on there, it lists on there that you annually you elect a president, a vice president, secretary, treasurer, or secretary, I should say. Shouldn't that secretary be a staff member that has the means to, from the Park and Rec Department, to take the notes and get them done and out to people?
To your first point about the number of members, I don't know, the 7 of you can be pretty unruly at times. It is hard to wrangle you. That's why I have a broken arm. It's really up to you all. I would not recommend any more than 7. I think that becomes troublesome. 7 is what we currently have. If you want to shrink it, you certainly can. We won't complain. It's less people to try to manage. To the second point about secretary, I've seen it done both ways in my previous community. Our city clerk and their staff staffed our respective boards and commissions and committees. We can definitely do that. If you go to a secretary role, that person would be working directly with whoever the staff, assigned staff, whether that's Dusty or his executive assistant. It really, I don't want to say that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter. We have certain requirements for minutes and things like that we follow. Whoever gets them to the right person is who gets them to the right person. So.
Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this is maybe directed at Councilman Bueller, just because he's in step with that board quite a bit, and also sits on it as a council member. But are we having troubles filling any of these spots? Because I guess that was to go with Councilman Danforth's question is 7 may seem a lot if we're having troubles filling it, but if we don't have troubles filling these roles, I mean, essentially, the advisory board, I think, should consist of something like a council where 1 from each ward is someone representing. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's my understanding that we have several people that appear to be qualified that we're interested in. To Mike's point about 7, we suffered this. Mike, you got to remember this from Planning Commission back in the day. We would have trouble making quorums all the time. And if you got 7, I think you got a better chance of getting a quorum. The other thing is too, if you want to try to elect a president, a vice president, and a secretary, you can have a better shot at it, I think, with 7. That's my opinion.
The quorum thing was the reason why I kept it. I wanted to keep it at 7. I thought it made more sense. Councilman Danforth has a question. Would anyone like to speak before Councilman Danforth does the second time? Councilman Danforth?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Do we have any sub-advisory boards for the ice arena or for the zoo? Do we have subcommittees or boards that are in place that?
So it's my understanding there used to be a golf board. I don't think that they exist anymore, and I don't believe that was an official board of the city. It was a subset of the Park and Rec board. The zoo has the Zoological Society, which is not a city board. I'm trying to think of any others. There's Animal Control Board, but that's kind of nuanced. Yeah. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not, Mike.
Well, yeah, if we had a number of advisory boards for specific locations, then we're involving a lot of people already in the community. Then if we had a zoo board, if we had a ice hockey, or let's say not ice hockey, but an ice rink board, advisory board, or the wellness center. I know we used to have a wellness center board, advisory board. So it just seems like we got, to me, 7 seems like a lot. Plus you're going to have a council person on there. Personally, I would go with 5, but it's not a killer one way or the other.
Thank you. Councilman Paulson, did you have something?
Yes, different topic, if we're done with that one. Thank you, Mayor. My only question, and this is no disrespect for the Public Works Department because I'm not disagreeing with this, but it says that the designation of use of any public park or designated area thereof for recreational purposes shall be designated by the board in consultation with the Public Works Department and subject to review and recommendation by the Plan Commission to the City Council. The only reason I bring that up is I do know from previous experience on city staff is that has been written into other ordinances and it was not followed. It was not being followed. And I don't have a specific example off the top of my head, but I do remember having that discussion at the time that it was in the ordinance and we weren't following our own ordinance because people weren't talking. I just don't want to create an issue down the road if that needs to be in there or not.
So we added that clarifying language largely because that's the current practice. So parkland dedication goes through the Planning Commission, which is part of the Community Development Division of Public Works. So we're trying to clarify that language, and Heath can speak probably better to this than I can, but sometimes I think there's a little bit of who's on first, who's actually responsible for this, who's making the decision. And what we tried to do here was clarify that staff, so the Park and Rec staff is going to work together with the Public Works Department staff, make that recommendation as part of the planning process, and that's where it ultimately gets approved. The City Council currently does not approve parkland dedication. So to your point, you're right. We do have several instances within our ordinances where someone is called, the fire chief is the administrator, of the fire code. The the Public Works, the city engineer is the administrator of certain sections of the code, and so we're trying to clear those things up, but then also follow that practice. So that's why we added that language, but Heath or Lisa, you can chime in if I am murdering it, which I probably am.
No, I would only add that also in City Code, Chapter 24, the subdivision regulations that are administered by Public Works, they too reference this parkland dedication because it's obviously part of the subdivision process. And they refer to this chapter of City Code as far as what that process is supposed to look like. And so that's where we were trying to sync the two so they made sense and coordinated with one another.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a couple questions on 140120, paragraph 3, concerning the whether it's cash value or a parcel of land. Okay, I want to make sure. It says may allow the owner to donate, but then it says such decision shall be the decision of the City Council. So it's optional, but the City Council still dictates, correct? Am I reading that correctly?
Right. So ultimately, you guys would have, my understanding is you guys would have to approve that. So that's why it would still have to come as a recommendation to the governing body.
Okay. And I'm fine with that, but now another question that I want to make sure, wondering where the council weighs in, if at all. It says the value shall be determined by the Department of Public Works, period.
Yes.
I mean, does that,
oh, sorry.
I mean, that presumably would be our Public Works Director. I'm not questioning your ability, Heath, but a couple things. I mean, one is what is necessarily your expertise in that area, and secondly, couldn't that potentially be a conflict of interest there if you're making the decision as to the value?
That's a good comment, Councilman Vilhauer, and I'd let Lisa speak to this in more detail, but first of all, I agree completely. I don't want to be appraising land. I don't want to be assessing the values. The correction, the intent behind changing that language, though, I can speak to that. We've ran into issues with the previous language, reading it being it's probably in the draft there, some language referencing the pre-annexed value. Well, that, pun intended, is dirt cheap as compared to once it's annexed. And so the city, we felt, was not reaping enough benefit of getting value in a fee in lieu of land versus, you know, the acres of parkland that we'd otherwise be obtaining. It ended up being peanuts, pennies on the dollar for what it otherwise could be. So we're trying to fix that and correct that. So where that actual value comes from, I think you're right. We could probably improve that language a little bit so that it's a little bit more of a. And I think Brandy maybe even had some language drafted that she can share with Lisa outside this meeting to try to.
Yeah, and I'm not saying as a council member that I necessarily want to be involved in that either, but I think it should be more than just your position, whether it's your city manager, finance officer, but a committee that would make that decision rather than your department, Heath, would be my thought on that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess for my comments, you know, because this is a collaborative process, so I'm appreciating everybody's comments. My thought process is that once this was passed, there would be some internal policies, guidelines for the Department of Public Works to assess that. The other, what I'm going to call fail-safe, is that we also have another section, I believe it's in Article 7, which allows that anyone who is displeased with the decision of a department can then come to the council for that. So really this value hopefully would never have to come to you guys, but there is that fail-safe of further negotiation, I guess is what I would say.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Danforth?
Nope, I'm good.
Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. How would we, Heath, this goes to you, how would you determine the value of that property? What would be your process to do that?
Again, I specifically or personally wasn't anticipating having that role, so I hadn't really given much thought to that specifically for me. But I could, if you'd like. I know Brandy has more thoughts on what she was anticipating that would look like, because she administers a lot of that land value facilitation with the developers through that subdivision process.
Okay. If she doesn't mind. Thanks.
Community Development Manager, Brandy Hatton.
Thank you. So I guess I had kind of drafted some just clarifying, because currently it can be a little vague how it's written and then how we went through the process. So, but as far as the cash in lieu amount, and Heath had referenced it, of how we've been doing it in the past, we get the valuation from the Director of Equalization, but it has been the county assessed value. And so then comparatively, when we're taking land from a development to meet the park dedication requirements, we're taking 5% of the total land area being either annexed or concept planned. And I provided some language too that clarifies that further as well, at which point do we have the park dedication proposal come forward. And then the process of it goes to the Park Advisory Board and then to Plan Commission, who will approve the annexation or concept plan. And then ultimately it will come to council when the plat and development agreement come forward, and then we spell out the details of the park dedication that was decided, I guess, by Park Board and Plan Commission. But going back then to the 5% of the cash in lieu, so when that's determined, when you compare it to when you're taking land from a development, it is worth a lot more when all we're getting for the cash in lieu is the county assessed value. So that's just where bringing this ordinance, clarifying it, and then also just bringing it to be more apples to apples. If we do go the cash in lieu route, to be, I guess for the word, to match of when we're getting land dedication, to match that value, if that makes sense.
Brandy, if you could, did you have in your mind how that number would be established? I think that's really the root of the question, is how are we going to establish that number that's post-annexation land value number?
And so I have worked with Shauna Constant, Director of Equalization, on this before, and she actually has that established already. So then, because when we've been looking into this in the past and here and there, and really looking at what the assessed value is when it's in the county, and then what it would be assessed as residentially annexed property in city limits. And it's significantly more impactful. So, and I think just to even give, if I recall correctly, that it would be like $1,200 per acre. And then in the city, it would be like $150,000 per acre as well. So when you, and then two, so that really, it makes the 5% land dedication, I mean, it just makes it equal to what, you're either getting the cash or the land. And then you're also, if you're taking the cash that and maybe you're taking less land, but then you're getting some money to have to develop the park as well. So it just, and then so either just doing either or a combination.
Councilman Tupper?
Ms. Hatton just answered my question, so.
Any further questions or comments, Council? Councilman Beeler?
Just have a comment. I think you folks did a good job with this thing. I think you did a nice work getting this done. Thanks.
Mayor, if I can.
Councilman Danforth?
This is me, the guy with the tail. So if we're annexing in bare land, how does that differ from, now we just did an annexation tonight that we brought in land and buildings, that's a business. So how do we make that determination difference between what's being annexed is a business because the value is going to be different versus just a land that's got a building on it, maybe not a business, versus bare land? How do we differentiate or come to those numbers?
Manager Hanton?
So this is one that, as I was working on this ordinance amendment, thought of that specifically, of what we just annexed and zoned, and with it coming in as R3. Now, because the use, though, is commercial, that they would have to get the storage units, that if that, then there would not be a park dedication requirement because it's not residentially used. Except that would need to be clarified, I think, on the ordinance amendment. And this one specifically, I mean, that, because we did not, at this point at least, we have not collected any park dedication. And, but it can be at the time of concept planning or annexation and zoning. So.
So, Mayor, can I follow up?
Follow up?
Yeah. So, Brandy, couple of things then. So, what if I'm annexing land in and its intent is to be commercial? Then does that have the park dedication taken from that?
No.
Okay, so there's nothing from that standpoint. So I bring it in, thinking it's going to be commercial. Down the road, I change my mind. It's residential. Now what?
So then, and that's where too, in the ordinance language, it's not on the draft that you guys have online, but trying to differentiate to say that upon annexation, if the intent is that the property will be subdivided further and concept planned, then at that time we would have them show where the park dedication was taking place. So at the time, if they brought it in as commercial and then it was proposed to be rezoned, it would have to match the concept plan if they were subdividing it further. So, and and subdivision is required after 5 lots are platted. So if they rezoned it, I mean, that's where it does get very tedious of the different examples and trying to differentiate at what point and when the park dedication takes place. And I think Heath can expand too. I think he wanted to add something before.
I know there's a lot of quirky little things here. For example, I bring in an acre of land, I bring in land and I build a $500,000 house on it. The park dedication is taken from the original land that gets annexed, correct?
Yes.
Based on that number. But if I bring in the same amount of land and it's already got the house on it, then is the 5% including the value of that house or just the land?
Just the land. And that would be for any like comparable residentially zoned property.
Okay.
Undeveloped in the
Okay.
city limits.
Okay, good.
Heath, did you have anything to add before?
Director Von Eyck? And I just want to point out, I mean, I understand this is something that when we were hashing this out, this was something that we were trying to figure out a proposal on too. I just want to point it out to the council that in my mind, this is not significantly different, but it is better than the existing ordinance where it just allows the board to do it. And right now, as it is, the Park and Rec Board has sole discretion over it. And only by appeal would it get to the city council. In this revision, it goes to the city council. So if for some reason we disagree with the valuation that was placed upon it by the Public Works Division, that's up to us then to make that decision if it should be more, less, whatever. Any further questions or comments? Manager Mack?
I would just provide one last note of significance. This would change the liaison position from a voting member to a liaison member.
Which would bring it into agreement with basically every other board that we have. So, all right. Hearing no further questions or comments, we will see this back for a second hearing. Item G is approval of the 2023 AFS CME Collective Bargaining Agreement Addendum. City Manager Mack?
Thank you, Mayor.
Start by explaining us what AFSME is.
I just wrote it down so I could make sure that I got it correct. AFSME is now I gotta look at it. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. So, as you all are aware, we have 3 employee unions. We entered into negotiations with all 3 unions this year for wages and benefits only. We did not reopen any additional language, with the exception of one minor correction in the police union. What you have in front of you for AFSME is an agreement to move all eligible employees 1 step, which equals 2%, and to provide a base cost of living adjustment of 5%, all of which have been budgeted for. And I would stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Open it up for questions and comments from the council. Oh yeah, sorry. We do need a motion. Thank you. A motion is made by Councilman Vilhauer, seconded by Councilman Schutte. Now discussion or questions. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thanks to Amanda and the staff that did these negotiations. I know it's long and tedious and it's not always fun, but it's obviously necessary, and to protect all of our employees and to give them, you know, some sort of benefit per year is big. So just wanted to say thank you to them.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? The motion is to approve the addendum. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item H is an approval of the 2023 IAFF Collective Bargaining Agreement Addendum. City Manager Mack?
Thank you, Mayor. The IAFF is the International Association of Firefighters, for those of you that did not know, and I didn't have to look that up either. What you have in front of you is the same wage adjustment that you just approved for AFSCME. All eligible employees, and I say eligible because we do have some employees throughout the organization. It's a handful or two across union and non-union employees who are at the highest step that they can go. So if they're at step 15, they would not receive the additional 2% step movement, but everyone would receive the 5% cost of living adjustment. We'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Any further questions? Or actually, we need a motion to approve. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Beeler. Now, questions or comments, Council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the addendum. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item I is an approval of the 2023 WPOA Collective Bargaining Agreement Addendum. City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. WPOA, Watertown Police Officers Association. I didn't have to look that one up either. Captain Rehorst. Again, same wage language as we've had with the other three unions. What you do see in here is striking of some language that was intended to be struck during the last round of negotiations and for whatever reason was missed. The way it read currently was that in order to receive holiday pay, you needed to be scheduled to work on that holiday. Well, we know, particularly within the police department, that schedules change and people sometimes get called in, and we want to make sure that they're receiving that benefit appropriately. And I would stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the addendum. Motion made by Councilman Paulson and seconded by Councilman Schutte. Questions or comments? Councilman Tupper?
Manager Mack, when you said that about, people getting called in, I take that falls the same with the fire department too.
Yeah. I mean, we have similar language. I'm not sure how it got missed the last time around. And like I said, we did not open negotiations for language changes this year, but they did bring it to our attention, and we wanted to make sure that that we got it right.
So that is straight across the board. Well, not just the fire department, police department, but the other ones too. Also.
Correct. And we do have provisions within the different contracts related to actual callback pay. So I might not be using the right language, but we want to make sure people are paid appropriately for the time that they're putting in.
Councilman Villauer.
Thank you, Mayor. You alluded to it, Manager Mack, but the actual agreements, we're acting on the addendum, the actual agreements run for 2023 and 2024.
Correct, and we will...
For all three unions.
For all three unions, yes, and for 2025 is when we would reopen the entire agreements for any kind of changes that we want to negotiate.
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the viewing public, I think it's important for folks to know that this did just come to us tonight without discussion, that this has had a great deal of discussion prior to this coming to this meeting tonight. So thank you.
Any further? City Manager Mack.
Yeah, just to Councilman Buehler's point, these dollar amounts were included in the 2023 budget. So we budgeted appropriately for this.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the addendum. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item J, which Councilman Paulson is recusing himself from, but he can still talk to if he would like, is an approval of a resolution of acceptance for development improvements located in the Morris First Edition on behalf of the developer Coho and the Morris Family LLC. We'll go to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye, for more information.
Absolutely. Get caught up with the map again. So these are development improvements in the Morris and Coho subdivision. Here's Willow Creek Drive for reference on this drawing, or this map, excuse me, this aerial. And then Highway 212 on the bottom of this map. The areas highlighted in red are what's being presented to the council tonight for a resolution of acceptance. This, if you recall, is the final step in the process for a development to go through as far as their public infrastructure is concerned. If you recall, one of the first steps is to issue a certificate of completion. That certificate of completion triggers a 1-year warranty. The Engineering Division of Public Works does an inspection along with other departments and divisions within the city. We make a requirement to perform any warranty correction items, and then we bring forth this resolution of acceptance to the council to finally get it off the developer's books and formally put it on our books for ownership and maintenance purposes in perpetuity. So with that all being said, these two areas in red are good to go. They've been through the warranty period. We've had a couple minor warranty issues addressed, and everything's been inspected by staff. And they've checked that off against the approved construction plans, which is really what drives our inspection out there. And we recommend it for approval.
Thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Vilhauer. Questions or comments, council?
Mayor, this is Mike. Say, if we, when we're done with this vote, I have one question that's somewhat related, if that's okay.
Councilman Danforth, why after the vote? Just curious.
Well, but because it really doesn't pertain to this specific spot. My question is, on that north, where the bridge is, where the new road went in up there, and we've had that connectivity issue with the bike path. Has that been finalized up there now? Where that bike path is now completed to the road?
I'll open it up to anyone who can answer that question.
The permanent connection the permanent improvements have not been made yet, but there is temporary access there, I believe, through gravel surfacing. I don't know if Colin could speak more in depth to that.
The first lift of asphalt was placed on the roadway, so there is asphalt across where it was gravel before. But then there might just be a short stretch, but it is filled in with gravel. I'm trying to think.
But I think the portion that Councilman Danforth is referring to is, correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman, the portion that runs northerly off of Willow Creek Drive that hasn't been formally reconstructed yet.
I don't believe that has, just gravel. Okay. But that will be addressed when we do the second lift of asphalt. That will be addressed when the second lift of asphalt is hopefully done in the spring.
Okay.
Any further? Councilman Tupper.
Just for my knowledge more than anything, what's the amended area? Can you explain that to me?
I can. I was hoping nobody would ask that. No, and I joke because there's a little bit of a long story to it. For whatever reason, back years ago, there was some confusion on how this whole subdivision tied in with the improvements to the neighboring property to the west. So what happened is this developer amended this segment out of this particular development agreement, which was formally approved by council. Subsequently, that's been this portion of roadway, the sanitary sewer underneath it. It's all been addressed in tandem with the adjacent property owner's development agreement. So it's a little complex. It's not how we operate today, I can assure you that. But it had to do with how these two properties tied together as far as the infrastructure and how it functioned.
Follow up?
Is that the area when you go out there, you go down that road a little ways and all of a sudden it just turns to gravel and kind of dead ends out there?
Correct, but I believe there's been improvements now to where that might have the first lift over the entire thing now of asphalt.
Any further questions or comments? The motion is to approve the improvements. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item K is an approval of amendment number 1 to the 292 Design Group JLG engineering contract for the Ice Arena project. For more information, go to City Manager Mack.
I'm going to defer to Public Works Director Heath Von Eye.
We'll go to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor, Manager Mack. This item is I'd call it a housekeeping item, although the dollar amount is significant. It's a little under $1.5 million contract amendment but I'll walk you through the details here. Back when we went into design contract with the 292 group, which is now currently known as JLG through an acquisition, we approved a contract with them for 5.5% of the total construction costs for the ice arena. So the initial estimates were obviously lower than what our final construction cost ended up being. The initial estimates of roughly $15 million have since doubled since 2021 when this this contract was first contemplated. That's the bad news. The good news is the 5.5%. What the consultant is basing that off of is a budget number that the contractor provided in January of 2022. And I'm pointing at my screen, but realizing I'm not sharing it, so I'll pull this up and zoom in on this language, because this paragraph in the background really summarizes it well. Again, 5.5% of the construction cost, originally estimated at $15 million. That would have totaled about an $800 and some thousand contract with 292. But as we've talked through that, the updated budget for construction was $26 million as of January of 2022. And that is what they are basing the 5.5% contract amendment off of, and how they obtained this $1.43 million in contract amendment. Why I say that's good news is the actual construction cost elevated since that January of 2022 date, and are actually to the tune of $33 million. Through our consultant, Tegra, the owner's rep, we've communicated with 292 and JLG Architects, and they've agreed graciously to leave that $400,000 on the table and not include that in their contract amount, which they're technically entitled to based on the original contract. Sorry for the long explanation, but there's a lot to walk through there, so I'll stand by for any questions related to this.
Thank you. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the amendment. Motion made by Councilman Tupper. Need a second? Second. Seconded by Councilman Villauer. Open it up for questions or comments. Councilman Villauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to repeat what I think I heard was that the 36.3 that we've been committed to as far as the cost, this is included in that amount.
It is. That's correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We are on to old business. Any old business? Any new business? Liaison member reports? Announcements. City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick announcement that we will not have a work session next Monday, January 9th, but we will have a work session in February.
Thank you. Councilman Villauer.
And our next council meeting is on 2 weeks from tonight, on Tuesday night again, right?
Oh.
Okay. And also, anything to report? I know the public a couple of weeks ago was aware that the Essential Air Service bid had been open, and Denver Air had put a bid in. Where's that process at? I'm presuming staff, airport board needs to look at that. I mean, can you give us any kind of update to the public so aware of what's going on? Anybody?
Sorry again, I was pausing for direction there. Councilman Villauer, yes, we actually have some internal meetings with our consultant, Volair, and we'll be going through those bids with them in detail with internal staff and the city manager, and proceeding to make a recommendation to the airport board as the advisory board to the council, of course, to ultimately decide what direction to take. That bid is out there and has public access to it, so I think it's safe to say that Denver Air Connect was the sole bidder. But however, within their bid, they did provide 3 different options for the community to consider. Those options include a current flight options to both Denver and Chicago. They include a second option of Denver flights only, and they included a third option of a Denver and Minneapolis option. So there's different prices associated with each one of those options, and I don't doubt that the Federal Highway Administration and the FAA will contemplate those price differences. But what we'll look at as a staff and then subsequently as the boards and the council, of course, is what we think would best serve the community to make recommendation for approval as far as our recommendation to the FAA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further announcements? There is no reason to go into executive session, therefore the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any debate on that? Hearing none, the motion is to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed, say nay. We are adjourned. Good night and God bless you, Watertown.